Hello, and welcome to the Snoozy Scientist, a calm corner of the universe where we wander through the mysteries of science, one sleepy yawn at a time. Whether you're curled beneath a blanket, listening as the night settles around you, or resting in that quiet space where thoughts begin to blur, you're exactly where you're meant to be. Tonight, we're traveling back 400 million years into Earth's past to a chapter of Earth's story few remember. Back then, the continents were bare and silent, draped in endless swamps, and the air was thick with oxygen. Life was only beginning to crawl from the safety of the seas and was still learning how to survive on land. And in that unrecognizable world, the first great hunters were not towering reptiles or charging mammals. From the shallows they emerged, scorpion like pioneers crawling out of the sea into a world untouched. And in that untouched world, they grew into giants. Some stretched longer than a human is tall, others stalked the land with claws and stingers, hunting prey that never saw them coming. For more than 150 million years, they were unchallenged, building the first food chains, shaping the first ecosystems, and reigning as the undisputed rulers of Earth. But what could have driven them from the safety of the oceans onto shores no life had ever touched before? How did they grow to such impossible sizes in a world without predators? And what mysterious force brought their unchallenged reign to an end, leaving behind only the small hidden hunters we know today? Tonight, we'll drift gently into that forgotten age, from the wave washed edges of Silurian shores to the dense, steaming jungles of the Carboniferous, to witness how eight legged kings once rewrote life's story and shaped the stage for everything that followed. But before we begin, if you enjoy these slow, soothing journeys into Earth's deep past, a gentle like and a tap on subscribe helps more curious minds discover this little corner of science. And if you'd like, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you winding down from tonight, and what time is it there? Now take a deep breath, let your shoulders soften, and together, let's slip back through the layers of time to the forgotten age when the world belonged to the Arachnids. 450 million years ago, the Earth was a very different place from the one we know now. If you could somehow stand on the surface of one of its continents back then, you might not even recognize it as the same planet. The land was silent. No birds called from the trees because there were no trees. No grass swayed in the wind because there was no grass. Not a single animal left a footprint in the soil. There was no soil at all, only bare rock and dusty sand stretching as far as the eye could see. The continents were vast, empty plains, shaped by wind and rain, but untouched by life. The air above them was strange, too. It was thinner and harsher than the air we breathe today. Clouds still formed, and storms still swept across the land, but there was no scent of leaves after the rain, no hum of insects rising from the ground. The world's surface was, in every way, a wilderness without witness. Yet life did exist, and it thrived, just not here. All of it was hidden beneath the surface of the sea. Oceans covered much of the planet, and they were full of movement and color. Strange and ancient creatures swam through those waters. Trilobites with hard segmented shells crawled along the sea floor like armored beetles. Delicate coral colonies built great underwater gardens, providing shelter for countless smaller species. Near the surface, shoals of tiny jawless fish drifted together in silvery clouds, pulsing with life in a realm ruled entirely by water. For hundreds of millions of years, the oceans had been the only home life had ever known. Water protected it, nourished it, and made it possible. Everything from the simplest single-celled organisms to the most complex animals of the time relied on the sea for survival. On land, the conditions seemed too harsh, too unstable, too foreign for anything to thrive. But even in this watery cradle, things were beginning to change. Evolution never stops, and the pressures that shape life are constant. As creatures grew larger and ecosystems became more complex, the competition for space, food, and safety intensified. Predators evolved new ways to hunt. Prey developed new ways to hide or escape. In this endless evolutionary race, some organisms began exploring places they had never gone before. At the same time, new opportunities were quietly forming beyond the shoreline. The atmosphere held far more oxygen than the water below, a resource that living things could exploit if they could only find a way to breathe it. And above the surface, there were no predators, no hunters lurking in the shallows, no competitors fighting for the same scraps of food. The land was empty, untouched, and full of possibility. Even the sun itself offered an invitation. In the water, light is filtered and dimmed as it passes through layers of liquid. On land, it pours down unfiltered and bright. For any organism that could reach beyond the sea, there would be an endless supply of light and warmth, an untapped source of energy and growth. These advantages came with enormous challenges. Breathing in open air required entirely new adaptations. Bodies built for swimming would need to change if they were to crawl or walk. And without the buoyant support of water, living things would need stronger structures to hold themselves up against the pull of gravity. The risks were immense, but so were the rewards. Some of the first steps toward solving these challenges began in small, almost imperceptible ways. Certain algae clung to damp rocks near the tide line, surviving brief moments of exposure when the tide retreated. Some simple invertebrates burrowed into wet sand and occasionally found themselves above water for short periods. Each tiny experiment in survival laid the groundwork for something more ambitious. The boundary between sea and land became a place of quiet innovation. Here, on rocky shorelines and tidal flats, evolution pushed life toward its next great transformation. Step by step, the impossible began to seem achievable. Fins would one day become legs, gills would give way to lungs, protective shells would grow thicker and stronger to withstand the drying air. The earth itself was preparing too. Volcanoes were reshaping continents, building mountain ranges and carving out coastlines. Rivers were etching channels into the land, carrying minerals and nutrients toward the sea. The planet's surface was becoming more dynamic, more varied, and more hospitable to those brave enough to explore it. No creature yet dared to walk across the barren continents, but the silence would not last forever. In the struggle for survival, life has always sought new frontiers, and the most daring leap of all was still to come. The stage was being set for one of evolution's boldest experiments, an audacious invasion that would forever change the face of the planet. What had once been an empty, lifeless expanse was about to become something else entirely. The first pioneers would crawl out of the sea, leaving the safety of the water behind, and stepping into a realm no living thing had ever touched. They would not know it, but their journey would transform the earth, filling those barren landscapes with forests, creatures, and the countless forms of life that now call the land home. Beneath the rolling waves of the Silurian seas, life moved to an ancient rhythm. Warm currents swept over shallow continental shelves, carrying drifting clouds of plankton and scattering sunlight into beams that danced through the water. Coral reefs, smaller and simpler than those we know today, rose from the seafloor like submerged cities, sheltering countless small creatures in their labyrinth of ridges and towers. Trilobites crept across the sediment in search of food, and delicate jawless fish glided silently, their soft bodies twisting in the current. But amid this quiet abundance, there were predators that shattered the stillness. They were the undisputed rulers of these seas, unmatched in strength and size, and they belonged to a lineage unlike anything alive today. These were the eurypterids, often called sea scorpions, ancient relatives of modern arachnids. Some were no larger than a hand, but others grew to more than 2.5 meters in length, larger than a grown human. They were armored, agile, and astonishingly efficient killers. A eurypterid's body was a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering. A broad shield-like head protected its sensory organs, while its compound eyes scanned the water for movement. Along its segmented body ran rows of powerful muscles, each one controlling a pair of limbs designed for specific tasks: spiny claws at the front for grabbing and slicing, paddle-like legs at the back for swift propulsion. Its entire form was built for speed, strength, and precision, honed by millions of years of evolution into a perfect marine hunter. They ruled through patience as much as power. Eurypterids were ambush predators, masters of stealth in a world where sight and sound were often dulled by water. Some species buried themselves in the soft silt, their bodies hidden beneath a thin layer of sand, with only their eyes exposed. Others clung motionless to the shadows of reef ledges or waded beneath mats of floating algae. When prey drifted near, a soft-bodied worm, an early fish, or an unsuspecting trilobite, they exploded into motion. Their claws shot forward, hooking and dragging the victim toward a mouth lined with sharp, crushing plates. The strike was almost always fatal. Early fish, lacking the speed or armor of their later descendants, had little chance of escape. Even trilobites with their sturdy shells were often no match for the crushing force of eurypterid pincers. Few creatures in these waters could challenge them, and those that could were rare. For millions of years, eurypterids remained the apex predators of their world, shaping the behavior and evolution of nearly every animal that shared their seas. Their dominance extended beyond their hunting skills. Eurypterids were remarkably adaptable, thriving in a wide range of environments. Some prowled coastal shallows, patrolling ancient shorelines for prey, swept in by the tides. Others ventured into deeper waters, where dim light and colder currents offered different opportunities. A few species even pushed into brackish estuaries and river mouths, tolerating fluctuating salinity levels that would have killed more delicate marine life. This ability to exploit varied habitats helped them flourish across the globe and endure for more than 70 million years. The eurypterid's success was more than just a story of predation. It was also a story of innovation. Their sturdy, jointed limbs provided the strength and flexibility needed to maneuver across uneven seafloors. Their hardened exoskeletons offered protection not only from enemies, but also from the challenges of moving into new environments. Some even possessed structures on their undersides that functioned as primitive lungs, allowing them to breathe in low oxygen waters or survive briefly above the surface. These adaptations, born in the sea, would later become the foundation for a far greater evolutionary leap. The line between water and land was at this time still uncrossed by complex life. Yet the traits that allowed eurypterids to dominate beneath the waves, sturdy limbs, efficient respiration, and a physiology suited to ambush and pursuit, were exactly the traits that would one day allow their descendants to conquer the continents themselves. From this lineage would come the first scorpion-like pioneers to crawl from the water's edge onto barren shores. The sea scorpion's reign had laid the groundwork for one of life's boldest transformations. For now, though, the world remained theirs. Across warm, shallow seas, they hunted with patience and precision, their massive bodies gliding silently through the water. Every ripple they caused, every shadow they cast, spoke of their power. For countless ages, nothing could unseat them from their throne beneath the waves. The Eurypterid dynasty shaped not only the ecosystems of their time, but also the very blueprint of life that would one day rise from the sea to walk the land. The shoreline was a place of tension and possibility. For hundreds of millions of years, the border between land and sea had been a boundary life could not cross. Waves rolled in and withdrew again, leaving wet sand and scattered shells, but nothing stirred above the tide line. The continents beyond were barren plains of stone and dust, swept by wind and sunlight, but untouched by animal life. That emptiness was beginning to change. The seas had grown crowded with hunters and prey, and the old balance was breaking. Slowly, life began to test the unknown world beyond the waves. Among the creatures drawn toward this unclaimed realm were the ancestors of modern scorpions. Their earliest known representative, Paleophonus, appears in rocks more than 400 million years old. By modern standards, they were modest in size, no larger than a human hand, but their presence at the edge of the land was revolutionary. They did not march confidently from the water. Instead, they crept cautiously, adapting their bodies step by step to meet challenges no creature had faced before. Breathing was the first and most immediate problem. In water, oxygen is dissolved and can be absorbed through gills, but on land, the air is thin and dry, and exposed tissues quickly lose moisture. To survive, these early scorpions developed a new way to draw oxygen from the air. Inside their bodies, clusters of thin, leaf-like plates formed structures known as book lungs. Stacked together like the pages of a book, these delicate tissues created a large surface area for gas exchange, while remaining enclosed and protected from the air's drying effects. This innovation allowed oxygen to flow directly into their blood, giving them the energy to explore beyond the tides. But breathing was only one challenge. Moving on land was another. In the water, buoyancy offsets weight, and fins or paddles can push a body forward with little effort. On land, gravity pressed down relentlessly, and limbs had to support the full weight of the body while propelling it forward. The early scorpions responded with sturdier legs and more flexible joints. Their limbs became segmented and muscular, capable of lifting their bodies clear of the ground and carrying them over rocks and sand. Over time, these limbs developed into versatile tools, equipped with pincers for seizing prey and fine-tuned control for navigating uneven terrain. Their external armor also changed. The exoskeleton that had once protected them in the sea had to become more resistant to drying out. Layers of wax-like lipids began coating the surface, sealing in moisture and preventing fatal water loss in the open air. The placement of sensory hairs shifted too, evolving into a network capable of detecting vibrations through the ground, a crucial advantage in an environment where sound traveled differently and hiding prey no longer betrayed its presence through ripples in water. These adaptations opened a world of opportunity. The land beyond the shoreline was almost empty of predators, filled instead with slow, soft-bodied creatures that had already made the transition: primitive worms, early millipedes, and other detritivores feeding on the first mats of terrestrial plants and algae. These early plants, low to the ground and simple in structure, clung to damp soil along rivers and lakes. The scorpion's arrival brought a new force into this ecosystem. They were ambush specialists, often burying themselves in moist soil or lurking beneath decomposing plant matter until an unsuspecting invertebrate wandered too close. When it did, they struck with precision, grasping it in powerful claws and subduing it with venom that evolved as an efficient way to immobilize prey. Each successful hunt set a chain of changes into motion. Prey species began evolving new defenses, like thicker exoskeletons or faster reflexes. Those changes, in turn, pushed the scorpions to become more efficient hunters. They refined their senses, honed their venom, and improved their agility. The quiet interactions between hunter and hunted shaped the earliest terrestrial food webs, weaving a tapestry of evolutionary pressure that would continue for millions of years. The scorpion's presence also altered the land itself. As they burrowed, they loosened and aerated the soil, creating microhabitats for other organisms. Their hunting redistributed nutrients and influenced population sizes, helping stabilize the fragile balance of these young ecosystems. Even their bodies, when they died, added organic matter to the ground, enriching the soil and supporting the growth of more complex plant life. At first, they remained tethered to the damp margins of shorelines and riverbanks, their bodies still dependent on moisture to function, but with each generation, their adaptations improved. Some species ventured farther from the water, exploring forests of towering fungi and the first vascular plants. Others specialized in particular environments, becoming more efficient burrowers or more patient ambush hunters. In doing so, they expanded the reach of life across the continents. The world that had once been silent and still was now beginning to move. Tracks crisscrossed the soft ground, tiny burrows lined the edges of streams, and faint disturbances marked the presence of hunters in hiding. Each of these signs was part of a broader transformation. Life was no longer confined to the sea. The first terrestrial food webs were forming, and the scorpions were among the key players shaping their structure. The shoreline was no longer a barrier, it had become a bridge, and from that bridge, the story of life on land had begun to unfold. The land that stretched beyond the tide line was still raw and unfinished, a landscape in the earliest stages of transformation. It was silent but not lifeless, a place where thin layers of soil clung to bare rock and low mats of moss like plants traced the edges of rivers and lakes. There were no birds overhead, no reptiles basking on sun warmed stones, and no mammals curled in burrows beneath the earth. Yet life had begun to carve out a foothold here, and among the most influential forces shaping this new world were the early arachnids. With no vertebrates to share the landscape, the arachnids found themselves at the center of an ecological experiment. The absence of competition did not mean idleness, it meant opportunity, and they filled it with remarkable variety. Every role that would one day belong to reptiles, mammals, and birds was, for a time, theirs alone. They hunted, scavenged, decomposed, and recycled. They moved across damp soils, climbed early plants, and burrowed beneath layers of decaying vegetation. Their influence stretched into every corner of the young terrestrial world. Much of this success came from the traits that had carried them from water to land and continued to serve them well in their new environment. Their hard exoskeletons sealed in precious moisture, allowing them to survive in air that could quickly dry unprotected bodies. Jointed limbs gave them strength and flexibility, lifting them over roots, rocks, and uneven ground. Layers of sensory hairs on their legs and bodies detected the faintest tremors, while simple but efficient eyes tracked movement in the dim light. Together, these adaptations gave them an extraordinary ability to interact with their surroundings, to find food, avoid danger, and exploit the opportunities that lay before them. Predation remained one of their most important roles, and it rippled through the young ecosystems in profound ways. Early arachnids hunted the small invertebrates that shared the land with them, primitive millipedes, early insects, soft-bodied worms, and other arthropods drawn out of the water. Their hunting strategies were diverse. Some species became patient ambushers, lying motionless beneath fallen leaves, or just beneath the soil, ready to seize anything that passed within reach. Others evolved into active foragers, moving silently through the leaf litter in search of prey, their sensory systems tuned to the faintest vibrations of movement nearby. These interactions created one of the earliest examples of a structured food web on land, where predator and prey were locked in a continuous cycle of adaptation. But the story of their influence extended far beyond hunting. Many arachnids fed on the remains of dead organisms, becoming scavengers that cleaned the landscape of decay and helped nutrients return to the soil. This recycling of organic matter enriched the thin layers of early soils, allowing plants to grow more vigorously and spread farther inland. Other species took on the role of detritivores, consuming decomposing vegetation and breaking it down into smaller particles that fungi and bacteria could more easily process. In doing so, they accelerated the formation of fertile ground, paving the way for more complex plant communities and eventually the rise of entire terrestrial ecosystems. Their activities also shaped the behavior and evolution of other life forms. The presence of predators drove prey species to become more elusive and better defended. Some evolved tougher exoskeletons to resist stings and claws, while others grew faster or changed their behaviors to avoid detection. The constant push and pull of this evolutionary arms race led to new body forms, sensory adaptations, and survival strategies, many of which would influence terrestrial life for millions of years. Even plants were indirectly affected. As arachnids hunted herbivorous invertebrates, they influenced grazing pressure on early vegetation, shaping where and how plant life could thrive. As scavengers and detritivores broke down organic material, they returned nutrients to the soil, nourishing root systems and fueling the slow spread of plant cover across the land. In this way, the presence of arachnids altered not just the animal world, but the very landscape itself. Their dominance also fostered diversity among their own kind. Competition among arthropods was fierce, as it had been in the seas they left behind. Some species evolved thicker armor to resist the attacks of others. Some grew longer legs to escape pursuit, while others developed keener senses to detect movement or more potent venom to subdue agile prey. These rivalries refined their adaptations and encouraged specialization, driving rapid diversification that produced an array of forms and lifestyles. As plants continued to spread and the first primitive forests began to rise, the landscape offered even more opportunities. Layers of fallen leaves and decaying wood created complex habitats for ambushers and scavengers. Sturdy stems and low branches provided new surfaces to climb and explore. Some arachnids ventured upward, expanding their hunting grounds into the canopy of early vegetation, while others became burrow specialists, building intricate tunnels beneath the soil. What began as a handful of species near the water's edge grew into a vast and complex community, woven deeply into the fabric of the land. The ecosystems of this early terrestrial world were shaped by their presence at every level. They were the regulators of population sizes, the recyclers of nutrients, the catalysts of adaptation, and the quiet engineers of soil and habitat. Their influence extended into every interaction, every cycle, every corner of the landscape. In a world that was still young and unsettled, the arachnids did more than survive. They built the scaffolding on which future ecosystems would rise, creating patterns of interaction and balance that would persist long after new challengers arrived. The structure of terrestrial life itself was in many ways molded by their eight-legged presence. The world that unfolded during the Carboniferous period was a landscape transformed beyond recognition. What had once been barren plains and windswept rock was now a living, breathing expanse of green. Vast forests stretched across the continents, their dense canopies formed by tree-sized lycopsids and towering horsetails. These plants lacked flowers and broad leaves, but reached astonishing heights, their trunks wrapped in moss and lichen, their roots intertwined in dark, spongy soils fed by centuries of rain. Thick swamps spread across lowlands, dotted with the wide fronds of giant ferns. Every surface seemed alive with moisture and growth, and the air itself was heavy and damp, clinging to everything it touched. It was a world that pulsed with vitality, and one where size itself had become a defining feature of life. Within this primeval realm, the arthropods reached their greatest expression. The forests were their kingdom, and they ruled it not from the shadows but in plain sight, as giants that dwarfed anything crawling across the land today. The forest floor trembled under the weight of creatures whose presence would seem fantastical to modern eyes. Beneath the towering plants, a predator prowled through the undergrowth. Its armored body glistened in the dim light, its jointed tail poised like a loaded spring, tipped with a venomous stinger. This was Pulmonoscorpius, a scorpion the length of a house cat and one of the most formidable hunters of its time. Its pincers snapped shut with bone-crushing force, and every step was measured and deliberate. Sensitive hairs along its legs detected the faintest vibrations, allowing it to sense prey before it appeared. Early insects, soft-bodied worms, and small amphibians were all vulnerable to its sudden strike. Not all the titans of this world were hunters. Moving with steady, wave-like motion across the damp earth was Arthropleura, a colossal millipede stretching more than 2.5 meters long. Its body, composed of dozens of armored segments, rippled as hundreds of legs carried it forward in hypnotic synchrony. Despite its size, Arthropleura was a gentle giant, feeding on decaying leaves and plant debris scattered across the forest floor. It played a crucial role in the cycling of nutrients, breaking down dead vegetation and returning it to the soil. Its immense size offered protection from most threats, and few creatures dared to approach it. Above, the air was alive with motion. Among the trunks and branches of the towering plants, early protospiders began to experiment with one of evolution's most ingenious tools, silk. These ancestral web builders anchored thin threads between stems and leaves, forming primitive snares for passing insects. Their traps were simple compared to the intricate webs of their descendants, but they represented a profound leap in hunting strategy. By letting the wind and the movement of prey do the work, these spiders conserved energy and expanded their hunting range, securing their place in the evolving food web. The forests themselves teemed with creatures that would appear monstrous by modern standards. Dragonflies with wingspans as wide as a seagull darted through the humid air, their compound eyes scanning for prey below. Beetle-like insects with heavy exoskeletons scuttled across the soil, and strange, shrimp-like creatures leapt among the fallen fronds. Every layer of the ecosystem, from the leaf litter to the canopy, was alive with movement. The land had become a stage for creatures that seemed too large, too strange, and too alien to belong to the earth we know. In this world, ecological relationships deepened and diversified. Giant predators like Pulmonoscorpius shaped the behavior and evolution of the prey they hunted, driving adaptations in speed, armor, and hiding strategies. Plant eaters like Arthropleura influence the structure of the forests, their constant feeding accelerating the decomposition of plant matter and enriching the soil, which in turn allowed vegetation to grow even more abundantly. The first silk weavers introduced a new level of complexity to predator-prey dynamics, capturing prey that might otherwise have escaped and creating opportunities for more specialized interactions. The physical landscape itself was molded by these giants. The movements of massive arthropods carved trails into the soil, compacting earth and redistributing nutrients. Their burrowing and feeding habits shaped the structure of the ground beneath the forests, while their carcasses, when they died, provided rich deposits of organic material that sustained countless smaller organisms. The forests were not merely inhabited by these animals, they were sculpted by them. Even the atmosphere hummed with their presence. Insects filled the air in swarms, their buzzing wings forming a background chorus that echoed through the swampy forests. The rustle of Arthropleura's passage, the faint hiss of Pulmonoscorpius dragging its armored body across the soil, and the tearing sound of decaying plants being consumed all blended into a soundscape that belonged to another world. Life had found ways to exploit every layer of the environment, and at every level, the arthropods were at the center of it all. For millions of years, this age of giants continued, unchallenged by large vertebrates, which had not yet evolved the size or strength to compete. These colossal arthropods defined the structure of the earliest complex ecosystems, occupying niches that no other creatures could fill. Their dominance was visible, not just in their size, but in the influence they wielded over the land, the plants, and the very flow of nutrients and energy through the biosphere. It was a world unlike any that has existed since, a time when many-legged titans moved slowly and deliberately through primeval forests and across waterlogged plains. They crawled, climbed, and soared through a landscape designed for their scale, their forms a living testament to the extraordinary ways life can adapt and flourish when conditions allow. The Carboniferous was their era, a time when the land was shaped by the weight of their bodies and the rhythm of their movements, and when every corner of the Earth's surface bore the mark of their reign. The forests of the Carboniferous stretched across the continents like living oceans of green. They were unlike any forests that exist today, stranger, more alien, and yet breathtaking in their abundance. Vast stands of towering lycopsids and tree-sized horsetails rose toward the sun, their tall trunks wrapped in thick bark and their crowns spreading like umbrellas high above the ground. Giant ferns formed dense understories, their fronds curling and uncurling in the damp, filtered light. The air was heavy with moisture, so thick with humidity that every breath felt laden with water. Rain fell often and lingered long after the clouds had passed, soaking the soil and feeding countless swamps and shallow pools that lay beneath the canopy. The forest floor was a realm of perpetual twilight, sunlight, scattered and softened by layers of ancient vegetation, reached the ground in thin beams that shifted with the movement of leaves far above. The ground itself was spongy, built from countless generations of fallen plant matter that had piled up layer upon layer over millions of years. Every surface was alive. Mosses and fungi crept over the fallen logs. Roots twisted like serpents through the damp soil. Even the air buzzed with movement, as insects, many of them far larger than anything alive today, flitted between shafts of light. Among the rotting trunks and leaf litter, the rulers of this world prowled. Pulmonoscorpius crept through the undergrowth, its heavy exoskeleton scraping softly against the decaying wood. Each of its steps was deliberate, its pincers opening and closing in anticipation. This scorpion, the length of a small cat, was an ambush hunter. It relied on patience and stealth, blending into the shadows until a vibration in the soil or a tremor in the air betrayed the presence of prey. When the moment came, it lunged forward, seizing its victim in powerful claws before delivering a venomous sting. Elsewhere, Arthropleura moved like a living train across the swamp floor. Its many legs rippled in perfect sequence, carrying its enormous body over roots and through soft, wet soil. Despite its size, it was a gentle giant, content to feed on fallen leaves and decaying vegetation. Its passage transformed the landscape, turning dead plant matter into nutrient-rich waste that fed the forest's endless cycle of growth and decay. Every movement of Arthropleura helped sustain the world it lived in, returning nutrients to the soil and opening pathways through the dense vegetation for smaller creatures to follow. The ecosystem of the Carboniferous was a delicate web, built on countless interactions between plants, insects, and arthropods. Plants formed the foundation, capturing sunlight and turning it into food through photosynthesis. Herbivores, from primitive millipedes to small insect like creatures, fed on this plant matter, and in turn, they became prey for predators like the giant scorpions and proto-spiders that lurked among the roots. Nothing went to waste. Even the remains of the dead were quickly claimed by scavengers and decomposers, their bodies broken down and returned to the soil to feed the next generation of life. The skies above the canopy were alive with movement too. Giant dragonflies, some with wingspans stretching more than 70 centimeters, glided effortlessly through the humid air. Their wings shimmered in the filtered light as they darted after smaller insects, catching them mid-flight with astonishing precision. These aerial hunters were among the most advanced predators of their time, their compound eyes capable of detecting even the slightest movement, and their wings powerful enough to keep them aloft for long, patient hunts. Smaller flying insects swarmed near the tops of the trees, feeding on spores and plant juices. Their populations were immense, forming the base of an aerial food chain that stretched from the smallest gnat to the largest dragonfly, and as the dragonflies thrived, they too became prey. Proto-spiders spun simple silk snares between branches, waiting for the brush of a wing to announce a trapped meal. Even the scorpions on the ground occasionally feasted on fallen flyers that ventured too low. Every level of this ancient ecosystem was deeply interconnected. The towering plants provided food and shelter for herbivores. Those herbivores sustained a growing population of predators, and their presence in turn kept prey populations from overwhelming the landscape. Scavengers and decomposers recycled nutrients back into the soil, ensuring that the great forests continued to flourish. The result was a balanced, self-sustaining system that had no need for large vertebrates. Arthropods and insects filled every role, from the smallest detritivore to the most powerful hunter. The Carboniferous swamp was not a quiet place. It pulsed with constant activity. The rustle of leaves betrayed the movement of a giant millipede. The faint hum of dragonfly wings echoed between the towering trunks. Hidden beneath the surface of the leaf litter, the soft scraping of armored legs signaled the presence of a patient predator. Even the steady drip of water from the canopy above was part of the rhythm, a reminder that life here was shaped by cycles of rain, growth, decay, and renewal. This was a world ruled by many-legged titans, a place where arthropods and insects dominated every layer of the environment. They hunted, fed, reproduced, and died in endless succession, each playing a part in the grand machinery of the Carboniferous ecosystem. And through it all, the forest continued to stretch higher, the swamps to spread wider, and the air to thrum with the beating of wings. Life, vast and strange, had claimed the land completely. The towering forests and sprawling wetlands of the Carboniferous period were filled with creatures so large they seem almost imaginary today. But their size was not just a quirk of evolution or the slow accumulation of adaptations over time. It was the result of a deeper and more fundamental force, one woven into the very chemistry of the world around them. The secret behind their gigantism was hidden not in muscle or bone, but in the air itself. During this time, Earth's atmosphere was unlike the one we breathe today. Oxygen levels soared to around 35%, far higher than the 21% that fills our lungs in the modern world. It was a change that left no visible trace in stone or fossil, yet it shaped every living thing on the planet. It was oxygen, abundant and easily available, that lifted arthropods beyond their usual limits and allowed them to grow into giants. To understand why this mattered so deeply, we must look at how these animals breathe. Most modern vertebrates, including mammals, have complex respiratory systems. Our lungs draw air deep into our bodies, and our blood carries oxygen to every cell. Arthropods, however, work differently. Their bodies are covered by rigid exoskeletons, which cannot expand like our chests do, so they cannot inhale in the same way. Instead, they rely on a branching network of tiny tubes called tracheae, which run directly from the outside air into their tissues. Oxygen moves through these tubes not by being pumped or carried, but by simple diffusion. It drifts from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration, seeping into their cells without any mechanical force. Diffusion is a beautifully simple system, but it has strict physical limits. It works quickly over short distances, but the farther oxygen has to travel, the slower and less efficient it becomes. In a small arthropod, this is not a problem. The oxygen has only a short distance to move, and it reaches every cell easily. But as the body grows larger, the limitations of diffusion begin to show. Oxygen struggles to reach the innermost tissues, and the animal's metabolic demands begin to outpace its supply. That is why most arthropods today, from spiders to beetles, remain relatively small. Their breathing system simply cannot support the oxygen needs of a large body under modern atmospheric conditions. The Carboniferous changed this equation completely. With so much oxygen in the air, the gradient driving diffusion was much steeper. More oxygen could flow through the same narrow tubes, and it could reach deeper into tissues before its concentration dropped too low. This allowed arthropods to grow larger without suffocating. Muscles could work harder, tissues could stay supplied, and energy demands that would be impossible today became sustainable. Their biology had not fundamentally changed, but the environment had shifted the limits of what that biology could achieve. The effects rippled through every aspect of their lives. Larger bodies meant more powerful muscles, which in turn allowed for greater strength and speed. Arthropods could pursue new hunting strategies, overpowering prey that would have been beyond their reach before. They could grow thicker exoskeletons for protection without the extra weight becoming crippling. They could explore new ecological roles, climbing higher into vegetation or dominating the forest floor. Even reproduction was affected, as larger bodies allowed for larger egg clutches and the ability to guard or transport offspring more effectively. The comparison with modern arthropods makes this contrast clear. A typical house spider today is only a few centimeters across, and even the largest tarantulas rarely exceed the size of a human hand. Their tracheal systems are perfectly adequate for their bodies, but they could not support anything much bigger. If you were to scale up a modern insect to the size of its Carboniferous ancestors, it would suffocate in minutes. The thin, slow movement of oxygen simply could not keep up with the demands of its tissues. This oxygen-rich world created a feedback loop that reinforced itself. Vast forests of primitive plants pumped out more oxygen as they grew, while the decomposition of their remains buried carbon deep underground, preventing it from recombining with oxygen as carbon dioxide. As a result, oxygen levels stayed high, and gigantism remained viable for millions of years. Arthropods and plants evolved together in this altered atmosphere, each shaping and sustaining the other's success. But Earth's atmosphere is never static. Over long spans of time, tectonic shifts, changing sea levels, and climatic upheavals began to alter the balance. The great swampy forests shrank as the continents dried and cooled, and with their decline, oxygen production fell. Gradually, the atmosphere began to lose its richness. Oxygen levels dropped, and the very force that had enabled gigantism now imposed new limits. The diffusion that once fueled enormous bodies could no longer meet their needs. Muscles weakened, metabolism slowed, and once dominant giants found themselves struggling to survive. Evolution responded in the only way it could, by favoring smaller bodies once again. Species that had once been towering became modest in size, and many of the largest forms disappeared altogether. Their era had ended, not because they had failed, but because the conditions that had made their success possible had changed. The story of Carboniferous gigantism is not simply about size. It is about the delicate interplay between biology and environment, and how something as invisible as the air can define the very shape of life. Oxygen wrote the rules of that ancient world, lifting arthropods to extraordinary heights, and then, as the balance shifted, gently pulling them back down. The giants of that era were living reflections of the atmosphere they breathed, and when that atmosphere changed, so too did the face of life on land. In the layered pages of Earth's deep history, every fossil is a clue to a story that ended long ago. Most of those stories are fragmented, incomplete, and scattered, and piecing them together requires patience and humility. Among the most striking examples of how those ancient puzzles can mislead us is the strange case of Megarachne, a fossil that once rewrote what we thought we knew about prehistoric predators, only to unravel into a very different truth. The story began in the early 1980s, when paleontologists in Argentina's San Luis province unearthed a peculiar fossil from rocks dating to the late Carboniferous period. More than 300 million years in the past, the specimen was unlike anything they had seen before. It was large, nearly half a meter wide, with a broad carapace and flattened limbs that seemed unmistakably arachnid. Its proportions suggested a creature of staggering size, far beyond any spider known from the fossil record. Based on the evidence available, the researchers concluded they had found something extraordinary, the largest spider to have ever walked the earth. They named it Megarachne cervinae, Great Spider, and the discovery quickly escaped the world of academic journals and entered the realm of popular imagination. Television documentaries and natural history books described it as a monster of the Carboniferous undergrowth, a predator that might have ambushed amphibians and trapped ancient insects in webs as strong as steel. Artists illustrated it crouched beneath towering ferns, its limbs splayed across the forest floor, a living nightmare stalking a primeval jungle. For nearly 2 decades, Megarachne became a fixture of prehistoric storytelling, celebrated as one of evolution's most formidable creations. Yet, even in those early days, a few details did not sit comfortably with specialists who studied arachnids. The supposed legs of Megarachne were thicker and more heavily built than any spiders, and the structures that had been identified as eyes seemed oddly arranged. Some features appeared more primitive than expected for a spider of its time, but without a more complete specimen, there was little to go on. The original fossil was incomplete, and the missing parts could hold the answers. So the classification remained, standing unchallenged in textbooks and museum displays. That uncertainty lingered until the early 2000s, when a second fossil of Megarachne came to light. This new specimen was far better preserved, with details that the original had not revealed, and those details told a completely different story. What had been thought to be a spider's carapace turned out to have characteristics shared by an entirely separate group of arthropods. The body segments were arranged in a way not seen in spiders at all. The limbs, too, were unmistakably wrong for a terrestrial hunter. Gradually, a new picture formed, and it was one that would overturn nearly everything that had been assumed. Megarachne was not a spider. It was not even a terrestrial animal. It was a eurypterid, a member of a group of extinct aquatic arthropods, often referred to as sea scorpions. Eurypterids were formidable hunters in their own right, distant relatives of modern scorpions and horseshoe crabs, and they had once been among the dominant predators in Earth's ancient seas and rivers. Rather than spinning webs or stalking across the forest floor, Megarachne had likely lived in freshwater environments, gliding through murky waters or lying half buried in sediment as it waited to ambush passing prey. Its flattened limbs were not for crawling but for swimming. Its body plan, once thought to be arachnid, was perfectly suited to an aquatic ambush predator. The revelation was more than just a taxonomic correction. It was a humbling lesson in how science works and why certainty is always provisional. Paleontologists do not uncover complete creatures, but scattered traces the imprint of a shell, the shadow of a limb, the faint outline of a carapace. They must reconstruct an entire organism from these traces, often with no modern analog to guide them. It is a process that demands interpretation, and interpretation can go astray. When that happens, the correction is not a failure, but a sign of science doing what it is meant to do, revising its stories as new evidence comes to light. The case of Megarachne also illustrates how deeply our assumptions can shape the stories we tell about the past. For nearly 20 years, it was imagined as a spider, because that seemed to make sense. A massive arachnid fit perfectly into the popular image of Carboniferous life. But nature does not owe us easy narratives. It often produces creatures that defy expectations, blurring the lines between familiar categories. What we think is a spider may, on closer inspection, turn out to be a distant cousin with a completely different way of life. Even stripped of its former title as the largest spider ever, Megarachne remains an extraordinary find. It represents one of the last great branches of the eurypterids, predators that had once dominated the planet's waterways before vertebrates rose to prominence. Its reclassification deepened our understanding of Carboniferous ecosystems, revealing freshwater habitats that were far more complex and dynamic than once believed. And it demonstrated the power of scientific self-correction, a process that is not always fast, but that moves relentlessly toward a clearer picture of the truth. The tale of Megarachne is, in the end, a story about how science grows. A single fossil, misread for decades, became a reminder that even the most confident conclusions are temporary. What matters is the willingness to question, to revisit, and to look again. Beneath layers of rock and millions of years of silence, the past still holds its secrets, and with every discovery, even those that rewrite what we thought we knew, the story of life on Earth becomes a little clearer. In the deep forests and swampy lowlands of the Carboniferous world, predators and prey were locked in a silent, ancient contest. It was a race that had begun the moment the first arthropods left the sea and set foot on land, and it shaped every adaptation that followed. As environments grew more complex and the diversity of life exploded, the simple tools that had once been enough to survive no longer guaranteed success. Strength alone was not enough. Speed, while useful, had its limits. To remain at the top of the food chain, predators needed something new, something subtle, efficient, and precise. Over countless generations, evolution answered that need. The solution came in the form of chemistry. Deep within the bodies of early arachnids, cells began producing a cocktail of specialized molecules that could do what brute strength could not. These secretions, first used simply to help digest prey externally, grew more potent over time. Eventually, they became venom, a biological weapon that could paralyze, kill, or dissolve with remarkable accuracy. Once this innovation appeared, it changed the course of arachnid evolution forever. Venom was more than just a means of killing, it was a tool of efficiency. By injecting their prey with these chemical mixtures, early scorpions and proto-spiders could subdue animals much larger than themselves without risking injury in a prolonged struggle. Prey that might once have escaped a clumsy attack now froze in place almost instantly. Even heavily armored creatures were not safe, as certain venoms could break down their internal tissues, turning them into a nutrient-rich liquid that could be easily consumed. The diversity of venom mirrored the diversity of the arachnids themselves. Some evolved potent neurotoxins, targeting the nervous systems of their victims with deadly precision. Others developed enzymes that digested flesh from within, allowing them to feed with minimal effort. A few species even evolved venoms designed more for defense than attack, painful but non-lethal, capable of discouraging would-be predators without wasting energy on unnecessary killing. Each new adaptation refined the balance between predator and prey, pushing both sides toward greater complexity. While venom changed the way arachnids hunted, another innovation transformed the way they interacted with their environment. This one did not involve chemistry, but craftsmanship. Deep within their abdomens, certain early spiders and their relatives began to produce a remarkable substance, silk. At first, it was not the intricate web-spinning tool we know today. Instead, it was used for far simpler, more practical purposes. One of the earliest uses of silk was to protect the next generation. Female arachnids began wrapping their eggs in delicate cocoons, shielding them from drying out and from hungry scavengers. These silk sacs could be hidden under bark, tucked into crevices, or buried beneath the soil, greatly increasing the chances of survival for the young inside. In a world where predators lurked at every turn, this small act of protection gave arachnids a crucial reproductive advantage. Silk soon found other uses. Some species began lining their burrows with it, reinforcing the walls and preventing collapse in soft, shifting soil. Others used silk to create small shelters or retreat chambers, safe havens where they could molt or hide from larger hunters. A few learned to spin silk draglines, lifelines, that allowed them to drop from high places or escape quickly if threatened. These simple but effective behaviors opened new possibilities for survival. Over time, silk and venom became deeply intertwined with arachnid success. Together, they formed a dual arsenal that few other creatures could match. Venom allowed them to hunt with precision, dispatching prey quickly and conserving energy in the process. Silk provided safety and stability, enabling them to protect their offspring, adapt their surroundings, and explore new ecological niches. Each innovation reinforced the other, creating predators that were not only deadly, but also resourceful. The presence of venom and silk also reshaped the ecosystems around them. Prey species evolved new defenses, from thicker exoskeletons to behaviors that kept them out of reach. Competitors learned to exploit different food sources or to hunt at different times, avoiding direct conflict. In turn, arachnids responded with ever more sophisticated uses of their tools, fine-tuning their strategies to maintain their edge. The landscape of life became a constantly shifting battleground of adaptation and counter-adaptation, each side pushing the other toward new forms and behaviors. What had begun as simple chemical secretions and strands of protein became some of the most versatile and effective tools in nature. These adaptations, born in a world of damp forests and ancient swamps, would endure for hundreds of millions of years. They shaped not just the future of arachnids, but also the ecosystems they inhabited, influencing the evolution of countless species that would follow. Even today, their legacy is everywhere. Every time a spider spins a silken thread or a scorpion raises its venomous tail, it is performing a ritual written deep in evolutionary time. These are not just behaviors, but echoes of an ancient arms race, reminders of a period when life on land was still young and every advantage could mean the difference between survival and extinction. The forests that stretched across the Carboniferous world were places of endless invention. Life was no longer simply surviving on land, it was beginning to experiment, to refine, to specialize. Each creature carved out its own strategy for finding food and avoiding becoming food itself. Some relied on brute strength, others on speed or armor. But among the many predators that prowled this damp, crowded landscape, one group took a very different path. They began to hunt not with force or fury, but with patience and geometry. These were the first true spiders, and their invention would change the art of predation forever. Before the rise of the web, hunting was a costly business. Predators had to roam in search of prey, burning energy with every step. They had to fight or chase down their meals, often risking injury in the process. But the early spiders found a way to make the world work for them. Instead of pursuing their victims, they lured them in. Instead of exhausting themselves with constant motion, they built traps that did the work for them. At first, these traps were simple. Early spiders did not yet spin the intricate, symmetrical webs we recognize today. Their silk was used in smaller, subtler ways. Some spun thin strands across narrow gaps where insects might pass, creating tripwires that vibrated when touched. Others built loose sheets of sticky silk on the ground or between low plants, relying on chance encounters. Over countless generations, these crude beginnings evolved into more elaborate constructions. Spiral orb webs, funnel-shaped snares, and tangled three-dimensional nets appeared, each one a refinement of an idea that began with a single strand of silk stretched in hope. Silk was unlike any other material in the natural world. Lightweight but incredibly strong, it could stretch without breaking and stick to anything that brushed against it. It was a biological masterpiece, spun from special glands inside the spider's abdomen and extruded through tiny openings called spinnerets. Each species developed its own recipe for silk, tuning its stickiness, elasticity, and strength to match its environment and prey. Some kinds of silk were designed to hold fast to a struggling insect, others absorbed shocks or signaled the presence of a catch through delicate vibrations. A single spider could even produce different types of silk for different parts of its web, each with its own purpose. The evolution of web building revolutionized the way spiders interacted with the world. By turning the landscape itself into a hunting tool, they no longer needed to expend vast amounts of energy searching for food. Once a web was built, they could simply wait, poised at the edge of their creation, as the forest's endless parade of flying and crawling creatures blundered into their invisible snares. Energy that would once have been spent chasing prey could now be invested in growth, reproduction, and more complex behaviors. This shift gave spiders a powerful advantage over other predators and allowed them to thrive in almost every environment. The effects rippled far beyond the spiders themselves. Prey animals, once safe if they could outrun or outmaneuver a pursuer, now faced a new kind of danger. Speed and agility were no defense against a trap that lay silently between two branches. Some insects evolved sharper senses to detect the faint shimmer of silk or the subtle vibrations that betrayed a web's presence. Others altered their behavior, changing their flight patterns or timing their movements to avoid times when spiders were most active. Even the smallest changes in the design of a web could trigger new adaptations in the creatures that risked being caught in it. Predator and prey began a slow, intricate dance of evolution, each shaping the other's future. Web building also opened new ecological possibilities. By capturing flying insects, spiders expanded into niches that had previously been inaccessible. They could feed on prey that never touched the ground, building their webs high among the branches or stretched across open spaces. This, in turn, affected plant life. Many of the insects caught in webs were pollinators or herbivores, and their reduced numbers could influence which plants thrived and which struggled. The threads spun by spiders, though light as air, tugged gently at the balance of entire ecosystems. Even the structure of the web itself became an evolutionary battleground. Some spiders built wide, intricate designs that captured large numbers of small prey. Others created dense, compact webs strong enough to hold larger victims. The diversity of forms reflected the endless experimentation of nature, each web a silent record of millions of years of trial and error. The first webs were more than just hunting tools. They were extensions of the spider's bodies and minds, physical manifestations of instinct and adaptation. With them, spiders transformed from simple predators into architects of invisible worlds. They turned empty spaces into deadly traps, still air into hunting grounds, and chance encounters into survival strategies. And once this innovation took hold, it never left. The forests of the Carboniferous would never again be the same, for the air itself had become a place where predators could wait without moving at all. The reign of the Arachnids had lasted for millions of years. For generation after generation, they had ruled the land without challenge, their eight-legged hunters patrolling the leaf litter, the shadows, and the damp hollows beneath the towering forests. Their dominance had seemed absolute. No vertebrate had ever set foot on land to threaten their supremacy. But deep in the waters that still cradled most of Earth's life, a new kind of creature was beginning to stir, one that would change the balance of power forever. It began in the shallows, where freshwater rivers met the edges of the land. There, among the weeds and silt, lived fish unlike any that had existed before. These fish were not content to swim and hunt as their ancestors had. Their fins had grown stronger, their bones thicker, and their bodies more capable of supporting weight. Some of them used these sturdy limbs to push themselves across the muddy bottom of swamps and streams, lunging at insects and crustaceans that strayed too close. Over countless generations, their descendants grew bolder. They ventured closer to the shoreline, taking brief excursions out of the water before slipping back beneath the surface. And then, slowly, they began to stay. The first amphibians were awkward pioneers. They were not graceful like the fish they descended from, nor were they as agile as the arthropods that already dominated the land. Their bodies were heavy and their limbs clumsy, designed more for crawling than for walking. Their skin, soft and permeable, dried out quickly in the open air, forcing them to stay near water. But for all their weaknesses, they possessed a powerful advantage. They were vertebrates, supported by internal skeletons that could grow larger and stronger than any exoskeleton ever could. They had lungs that allowed them to breathe air directly, and they had senses that were better tuned for life above the surface. At first, their presence changed little. Amphibians hugged the margins of ponds and rivers, feeding on insects and small invertebrates that ventured too close to the water's edge. But their appetites were insatiable, and their numbers began to grow. Soon, they pushed further inland, crawling slowly through the damp undergrowth in search of prey. Their diets overlapped with those of the arachnids, and for the first time in Earth's history, the eight-legged hunters faced competition for their meals. In the dark soil beneath the roots of giant ferns, scorpions still waited patiently for passing insects, their venomous stings poised to strike. Above them, early spiders spun their silken snares, ready to trap anything that blundered into their invisible webs. But now, Small amphibians crept through the same territory, snapping up prey with lightning-fast strikes of their jaws. Their long, sticky tongues could pluck insects from the air, and their larger size allowed them to overpower prey that would have been too difficult for an arthropod to subdue. The interactions between these two worlds were complex. Amphibians did not simply compete with arachnids, they also became part of the food web. Young amphibians, soft-bodied and vulnerable, occasionally fell victim to the claws of large scorpions or the fangs of trapdoor spiders lurking in hidden burrows. In turn, the amphibians preyed on the arachnids themselves, swallowing smaller species whole when the opportunity arose. It was an evolving rivalry, a dynamic balance between hunter and hunted, each shaping the other's future. As amphibians adapted to life on land, their bodies changed in remarkable ways. Their limbs became more robust, better suited to lifting their weight off the ground. Their lungs grew more efficient, and some developed primitive ears to detect sounds in the air. Many evolved more complex eyes, allowing them to track fast-moving prey with precision. They also began to explore new habitats, venturing farther from the water and into the heart of the forests. With each generation, they became better suited to terrestrial life, and their influence spread deeper into the domain that arachnids had once held alone. For the arachnids, this was a turning point. Their dominance had been built on a world without vertebrate rivals, a world where size, speed, and venom were enough to ensure survival. But the amphibians brought a new kind of competition. They were stronger, with skeletons that could support greater bulk. They were more adaptable, able to exploit both water and land, and their intelligence, though primitive, allowed them to learn and respond to new challenges in ways arthropods could not. Even so, the arachnids were far from overthrown. They still ruled many parts of the ecosystem, their strategies refined over hundreds of millions of years. Their webs still caught countless flying insects. Their venom still killed swiftly and efficiently. Their small size and stealth still allowed them to thrive in niches where amphibians could not follow. The two groups coexisted, their interactions shaping the evolving landscapes of the Carboniferous world. The competition between arthropods and amphibians marked the beginning of a new era. The land was no longer the exclusive domain of eight-legged hunters. The arrival of vertebrates signaled the start of a slow but inevitable shift, one that would, over vast stretches of time, reshape the balance of life on Earth. The arachnids still held their ground, their dominance intact for now, but the age of vertebrate expansion had begun, and the story of life on land would never be the same again. The competition that had begun with the arrival of amphibians was only the first tremor of a much greater shift. For millions of years, life on land remained tied to water, just as it had been in the beginning. Amphibians could breathe air and walk on land, but their skin needed constant moisture, and their eggs had to be laid in water to survive. Rivers, lakes, and swamps were the boundaries of their world. Beyond them stretched vast inland landscapes, dry and unforgiving, places they could not conquer. But evolution is relentless, and over time, a new kind of creature emerged from their ranks, one that would break free of water's grasp and push the frontier of life farther than ever before. These were the first amniotes, the ancestors of reptiles. Their most important innovation was hidden within the delicate architecture of their eggs. Instead of soft, jelly-like spheres that had to be submerged in water, they laid eggs encased in protective shells with internal membranes. These membranes created a self-contained aquatic environment inside each egg, shielding the developing embryo from drying out while still allowing it to breathe. This breakthrough meant that reproduction no longer tied them to ponds or streams. Life could now begin far from water's edge, deep within forests or on dry plains where amphibians could not follow. This newfound freedom transformed everything about how these early reptiles lived. No longer limited by the need for constant moisture, they spread into new habitats, exploring inland territories that had remained untouched for hundreds of millions of years. Their skin thickened and became covered in tough, keratinized scales that sealed in moisture, allowing them to survive under the hot sun without drying out. Their limbs grew stronger, their muscles more powerful, and their lungs more efficient. Where amphibians had crawled clumsily across the ground, reptiles walked with purpose and speed. The earliest of these reptiles were small and unassuming, but they carried within them the potential for remarkable diversity. Some were agile insectivores, darting through the undergrowth in search of prey. Others were sturdier and more robust, built to crush the hard exoskeletons of arthropods or hunt the growing variety of small vertebrates. Their intelligence, though still primitive, began to surpass that of their amphibian ancestors. More complex nervous systems allowed for faster reflexes, sharper senses, and more sophisticated behaviors. They learned to stalk prey with patience and strike with precision, traits that would one day define the great reptilian predators of the future. For arachnids, the arrival of reptiles marked a new and more formidable challenge. Amphibians had competed for the same prey, but they had still been bound by the same environmental constraints. Reptiles were different. They roamed far beyond the damp edges of swamps and rivers, invading territories that arachnids had long ruled alone. Their size and strength allowed them to overpower prey that spiders and scorpions could not touch. Some even began feeding directly on the arachnids themselves, turning hunters into hunted. The change was visible in every corner of the landscape. In the leaf litter, where once only insects and arachnids had hunted, small lizard-like reptiles now darted through the shadows, snapping up anything they could catch. On dry plains, larger species prowled with long strides, chasing down prey with a speed no arthropod could match. Even the night was no longer a refuge. Keen eyes adapted to low light and finely tuned senses of smell allowed reptiles to hunt under the cover of darkness, invading the time and space where arachnids had once been most secure. But the arachnids were not defenseless. Their small size, venom, and stealth continued to serve them well, allowing them to thrive in niches where reptiles struggled to follow. Many retreated into the soil or the deeper layers of leaf litter where their predators could not reach. Others evolved new strategies for avoiding detection or striking more quickly when threatened. Some even adapted to hunt the young of these new reptiles, turning the tables on their challengers. Yet for the first time since they had claimed the land, arachnids were no longer the undisputed masters of their environment. The emergence of reptiles reshaped ecosystems in profound ways. Their ability to roam far from water meant that plant life was colonized more deeply, and the web of predator and prey grew increasingly complex. Reptiles ate not only insects and arachnids, but also amphibians and other reptiles. In turn, they became prey for larger species, driving an evolutionary race toward speed, strength, and cunning. The balance of power was shifting, and the rules of survival were being rewritten. This new age belonged not just to the many-legged hunters that had once ruled alone, but to a broader cast of characters. The land, once a stage dominated by arthropods and amphibians, now hosted a new class of predator that was faster, more mobile, and more adaptable than anything that had come before. The reptiles had broken through the final barrier that tied life to water, and in doing so, they had opened the door to a future in which vertebrates would become some of the most powerful and influential creatures to walk the earth. The arachnids still waited in their webs, and stalked through the shadows, their presence woven into every corner of the ecosystem. But the world around them was changing, and with every passing generation, the competition grew fiercer. The age of reptiles had begun, and the once unchallenged empire of the Arachnids was now only part of a much larger, more dangerous world. The forests that had once stretched endlessly across the Carboniferous world were changing. Where damp swamps and towering tree-like plants had once dominated, the landscape was beginning to dry. Rainfall patterns shifted, great wetlands drained away, and the colossal coal forests that had fed the atmosphere with oxygen for tens of millions of years started to thin and vanish. The transformation was slow, unfolding over millions of years, but its consequences rippled through every layer of life on Earth. The air itself was changing, and with it, the balance of power that had defined terrestrial ecosystems was about to be rewritten. As oxygen levels in the atmosphere began to decline from their ancient peak, the towering arthropods that had thrived under those conditions were the first to feel the shift. Their dominance had never been a matter of strength alone, but of circumstance. The thick air of the Carboniferous had made their immense bodies possible. Without it, their size became a burden. With every passing generation, their descendants emerged a little smaller, a little lighter, better suited to a world that no longer supported their gigantic forms. What had once been titans of the forest floor now became shadows of their former selves, adapting or vanishing as the environment changed around them. This great shrinking reshaped the web of life in ways that rippled far beyond the arthropods themselves. Predator-prey dynamics, once defined by towering scorpions and enormous dragonflies, began to shift dramatically. Smaller arthropods required less oxygen and moved with greater agility. Many could reproduce more quickly, filling ecological niches faster than their larger ancestors ever could. Prey species that had once faced massive, lumbering hunters now found themselves pursued by smaller, more numerous predators that relied on stealth, speed, and coordination instead of sheer size. The old rules no longer applied. The decline of the giants also created space for entirely new kinds of interactions. With the once dominant arthropods weakened, vertebrates began to seize opportunities that had previously been out of reach. Amphibians, which had clung to damp habitats near water, started pushing into new environments. Reptiles, newly evolved and unburdened by the respiratory limits that constrained arthropods, began to thrive. Their lungs drew oxygen deep into their bodies, and their circulatory systems delivered it efficiently to every cell. Unlike arthropods, their size did not depend on the chemistry of the atmosphere. They could grow larger and remain strong, their muscles powered by the steady pulse of oxygen-rich blood. The rise of these vertebrate competitors fundamentally altered the structure of terrestrial ecosystems. For the first time, the arthropods that had once dominated every level of the food chain now found themselves hunted. Small lizards prowled the forest floor, snapping up insects that had once gone unchallenged. Early synapsids, ancestors of mammals, stalked through the undergrowth, competing with arachnids for the same prey. Vertebrate predators, with their strength, speed, and endurance, brought a new kind of pressure to the land. No longer limited to ambushes or venomous strikes, these hunters could chase their prey, wear them down, and overpower them. As the arthropods shrank, the entire balance of energy in the ecosystem shifted. Large arthropods had once required enormous amounts of food to sustain themselves, and their presence shaped the abundance and distribution of prey. With smaller arthropods now dominating, less energy was locked up in their bodies, and more was available for other organisms. This shift allowed vertebrate populations to expand and diversify, creating complex food webs that included animals at every size and ecological level. The shrinking of the arthropods also affected the plant world. The disappearance of the vast swamp forests, those ancient engines of oxygen, paved the way for new types of vegetation. Seed-bearing plants began to spread across drier regions, creating different kinds of habitats. These plants supported new kinds of herbivores, which in turn attracted new predators. The once stable Carboniferous ecosystems grew more intricate and dynamic. Niches that had been static for millions of years were suddenly in flux, and competition among species intensified. For arachnids, this new world was a mixed blessing. Their massive ancestors had ruled by sheer size, but now survival demanded new strategies. Smaller bodies could exploit microhabitats, where vertebrates could not follow beneath stones, within leaf litter, and inside decaying logs. They refined their hunting techniques, relying more on stealth, venom, and silk to catch prey. Some became masters of concealment, while others evolved behaviors to avoid vertebrate predators altogether. Their role in the ecosystem did not vanish, but it changed fundamentally. No longer the dominant force, they became part of a broader, more complex system of life. The slow collapse of the Carboniferous, oxygen-rich world was not merely a climatic shift. It was an ecological revolution. Predator-prey relationships were rewritten. Competition for food and territory intensified. Entire evolutionary strategies were rendered obsolete, while new ones emerged. The planet's great arthropod giants, once the undisputed rulers of land and sky, were reduced to smaller, subtler forms. And in the vacuum they left behind, vertebrates surged forward, evolving into creatures that would one day dominate the Earth in ways the giant arthropods never could. The fall of the giants marked more than the end of an era. It was a turning point in the history of life itself. The shrinking of bodies, the rise of vertebrates, and the reshaping of ecosystems set the stage for everything that would follow, from the first great reptilian predators of the Permian to the mighty dinosaurs that would one day thunder across the continents. It was the breath of the planet, shifting and changing, that had built the world of giants. And it was that same breath, now altered, that swept them away and ushered in a new age of life. The world at the dawn of the Permian period was no longer the one the arachnids had conquered hundreds of millions of years earlier. The humid, swampy forests that had once blanketed the continents were beginning to wither, replaced by landscapes of stark contrasts. The once damp air grew dry. Rainfall became unpredictable. Vast wetlands, which had stretched for thousands of kilometers and supported dense plant life, receded as rivers changed course and global climates shifted. The age of endless humidity was coming to a close, and with it, the world that had nourished the giants of the Carboniferous was fading away. As the continents drifted closer together, they began to merge into a single, enormous landmass known as Pangaea. This supercontinent stretched from pole to pole and altered the global climate in profound ways. Its interior was far from the moderating influence of the oceans, and without those vast bodies of water to regulate temperature and precipitation, the land grew harsh and unforgiving. Hot summers baked the soil, while long, cold winters brought frost and drought. The dense, oxygen-rich atmosphere that had once filled the air thinned further, and the lush vegetation that had fueled towering arthropods and sprawling forests could no longer survive in such conditions. The once familiar landscapes transformed into something entirely different. Where swamp forests had stood, stretching endlessly beneath a humid sky, deserts now spread like scarred continents of stone and sand. Vast plains of dry soil replaced tangled thickets of ferns and towering lycopsids. Plants that had once grown in dense, oxygen producing mats vanished, replaced by hardier species that could tolerate dryness and poor soil. Low shrubs, seed bearing plants, and tough conifers became the new architects of the land. Their roots reached deep to find water, and their leaves evolved to conserve moisture in the parched air. For the arthropods that had once ruled these ecosystems, this changing world was unforgiving. Many of their greatest strengths had been suited to the old environment. Their bodies, adapted for moist air and abundant vegetation, struggled to cope with arid conditions. Their delicate respiratory systems were less efficient in the thinner atmosphere, and the once plentiful prey they depended on became scarcer. Some species vanished entirely as their habitats disappeared. Others retreated into smaller, more specialized niches, hiding beneath rocks, burrowing into the ground, or clinging to the few remaining pockets of moisture where life still thrived. Those that survived did so by becoming smaller, tougher, and more adaptable. The enormous millipedes and dragonflies of the Carboniferous had already dwindled as oxygen levels fell, and now they disappeared completely, replaced by more modest descendants. Scorpions learned to live in the new deserts, their armored bodies conserving water as they hunted beneath the starlight. Spiders refined their silk and hunting strategies, adapting to new prey and unpredictable climates. Arachnids were no longer the undisputed rulers of the land, but they were survivors, reshaping themselves to fit a harsher and less forgiving planet. While arthropods struggled to adapt, the vertebrates were flourishing. Reptiles, with their scaly skin and efficient lungs, were far better suited to the dry conditions. Their shelled eggs allowed them to reproduce far from water, and their internal skeletons gave them the strength and speed to roam over long distances in search of food and shelter. Some evolved into swift predators, capable of outrunning anything with 8 legs. Others became herbivores that could travel between scattered patches of vegetation, shaping the new ecosystems in ways arthropods never could. On the shifting sands and rocky plains, reptiles became the dominant form of life, their diversity expanding as the environment changed around them. The new climate also transformed the cycles of life itself. Seasons grew more extreme, bringing longer droughts and harsher cold. Floods swept across parched landscapes when rains finally came, reshaping rivers and carving new valleys. The unpredictable environment created new pressures, forcing plants and animals alike to innovate or perish. Entire ecosystems vanished, replaced by new ones built around drought-resistant plants and mobile, air-breathing animals. Life became leaner, more competitive, and more resilient. The arachnids, once the architects of the land's first food webs, were now part of a larger and more complex tapestry. They continued to play their roles as hunters, scavengers, and recyclers of organic matter, but their influence was no longer absolute. Where they had once been the apex predators, they now shared their world with larger, more powerful vertebrates that could travel farther, hunt more aggressively, and adapt to a broader range of environments. The end of the Carboniferous and the rise of the Permian was more than a shift in climate. It was a rewriting of Earth's ecological story. The land had become drier, the air thinner, and the competition fiercer. Arachnids endured, their lineage unbroken, and their legacy still woven into the soil and the shadows. But the era in which they shaped the world's ecosystems from the top had passed. In the new age of deserts and drought, the balance of power belonged to creatures that had mastered the challenges of the changing world, and the empire of the arachnids faded quietly into memory. The end of the Permian period was a time unlike anything life on Earth had ever faced before. For hundreds of millions of years, life had grown more complex. spreading across the continents and filling the seas with countless forms and shapes. Forests had risen and fallen, oceans had teemed with fish and corals, and the land had become home to creatures of every size and habit. But all of that balance, all of that steady march of evolution, would come to a sudden and devastating halt. About 252 million years ago, the world slipped into a crisis so profound that it nearly erased life itself. Scientists call it the Permian mass extinction, but it is often known by another name, the Great Dying. It was the most severe extinction event in Earth's history, wiping out roughly 9 out of every 10 species in the sea and about 7 out of every 10 on land. It marked the end of entire lineages that had flourished for hundreds of millions of years and reshaped the course of evolution in ways that would echo through every era that followed. The disaster did not unfold overnight. It began quietly, deep beneath the surface of the planet, where immense volcanic forces were building. In what is now Siberia, a colossal region of volcanoes erupted on a scale far beyond anything humanity has ever witnessed. For millions of years, lava poured across the landscape, releasing staggering amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The planet warmed, and the air grew thicker with greenhouse gases. Oceans, once cool and rich with oxygen, heated and lost their ability to sustain life. Acid rain fell from darkened skies, stripping soils of nutrients and killing plants. The oceans suffered most of all. As they warmed, they began to lose oxygen, creating vast dead zones where nothing could survive. Ancient coral reefs, which had anchored marine ecosystems for hundreds of millions of years, crumbled and vanished. Entire families of marine invertebrates, from trilobites to many types of brachiopods, disappeared forever. Even the fish that had dominated the seas were reduced to a fraction of their former diversity. On land, the destruction was just as severe. The great forests that had once stretched across continents collapsed as droughts became more frequent and temperatures rose. Plants struggled to adapt to the new, unstable climate, and the animals that depended on them soon followed. For arachnids, the Great Dying was a turning point. They had already survived the collapse of the humid Carboniferous forests and the spread of arid Permian landscapes. They had adapted to shrinking oxygen levels and to new competition from reptiles and other vertebrates. But the scale of this new disaster was beyond anything their world had prepared them for. Many of the great lineages that had traced their ancestry back to the first pioneers of land vanished completely. Some scorpion families that had once prowled the undergrowth disappeared without a trace. Entire groups of early spiders, adapted to ecosystems that no longer existed, faded from the fossil record forever. Yet, amid the devastation, some endured. The survivors were not the largest or the strongest, but the most adaptable. They were species that could tolerate a wide range of temperatures and that required less food to survive. Many were small and capable of hiding in burrows or beneath rocks, where conditions were slightly more stable. Others had flexible diets, feeding on whatever prey remained rather than relying on specific species that had gone extinct. These subtle advantages, insignificant in normal times, became the difference between survival and extinction. The aftermath of the Great Dying was a world almost unrecognizable. The diversity of life was shattered, and the planet's ecosystems had to rebuild from near zero. It took millions of years for biodiversity to recover, and even then, the new world that emerged was profoundly different from the one that had been lost. New groups of reptiles rose to dominance, setting the stage for the great age of dinosaurs that was still to come. Plants evolved new strategies to cope with changing climates, and insects diversified to fill the many empty niches left behind. Arachnids, though diminished, remained part of this new world. They continued to weave silk, deliver venom, and occupy the small but essential roles they had long played in the fabric of life. Their survival ensured that the lineage that had once ruled the land in the Carboniferous would continue, albeit in a humbler form. The world they inherited was harsher and less forgiving, but they were well suited to it. Their story did not end with the Great Dying. Instead, it entered a new chapter, one shaped by resilience, adaptation, and the quiet persistence of life in the face of overwhelming odds. The Permian extinction was not simply the end of an era, it was a reset of life itself, a moment when nature cleared the slate and began again. In that silence, the small and the adaptable inherited the earth, carrying forward the ancient legacy of those that came before them into a future no one could have predicted. The towering forests of the Carboniferous had long since crumbled into coal seams. The once giant millipedes and cat-sized scorpions were gone, and vertebrates now ruled the skies, the seas, and the land. Yet if you look closely at the ground beneath your feet, in the corners of a dark basement, or on the underside of a leaf, you can still see faint reflections of that ancient world. The descendants of those early arachnids are still here, carrying forward the legacy of hundreds of millions of years of evolution, not as rulers, but as masters of specialization. And though they are far smaller now, the tools that shaped their ancient success remain deeply embedded in their biology, refined but never abandoned. One of the most fundamental of these tools is the external skeleton that defines every arachnid. The first creatures to crawl from the seas onto dry land needed armor to protect them from a harsh new environment. They could not afford to lose moisture under the dry air, nor could they rely on the buoyancy of water to support their bodies. Their solution was an exoskeleton made of chitin, a light but tough material that shields them from injury and prevents water loss. That same structure still shapes modern spiders, scorpions, mites, and ticks. It gives them the strength to walk across uneven surfaces, the rigidity to support complex limbs, and the flexibility to molt as they grow. The exoskeleton is so successful that it has hardly changed in concept since those early days, and it remains one of the most defining features of arthropods as a whole. Venom, too, is an ancient weapon that has evolved into extraordinary diversity. Early scorpions developed simple toxins to disable their prey, but over millions of years, that chemical cocktail became far more specialized. Today, arachnids use venom in ways as varied as the environments they inhabit. Some spider venoms are rich in neurotoxins, designed to stop the nervous systems of insects in an instant. Others are enzymatic, breaking down tissue from within so that the spider can consume its prey more easily. Even within a single lineage, venom composition can vary dramatically depending on diet and habitat. The Australian funnel web spider produces one of the most potent venoms known, capable of shutting down a mammal's nervous system in minutes. In contrast, the desert scorpion uses a sting that targets the physiology of arthropods specifically, paralyzing them almost instantly without wasting energy on toxins that would harm vertebrates. Venom has become more than a weapon. It is a finely tuned biological tool, a reflection of millions of years of adaptation to countless ecological challenges. Silk is another legacy that has grown far beyond its humble beginnings. The first arachnids to produce silk did not use it to weave webs, but as a means of survival. They lined their burrows to prevent collapse, wrapped their eggs to protect them from desiccation, and sealed chambers against predators and parasites. Over time, silk became one of the most versatile materials in the natural world. Modern spiders use it to construct intricate traps, some spanning entire gaps between trees, Others produce sticky bolas-like threads to capture flying insects midair, or sheet webs designed to funnel prey toward a waiting predator. Some species even deploy silk in ways that have nothing to do with hunting. The young of many spiders release long, gossamer threads that catch the wind and carry them vast distances, a behavior known as ballooning. These silken sails can transport them across forests, rivers, or even oceans. With each new evolutionary experiment, silk has proven to be one of nature's most adaptable inventions. Even the smallest details of arachnid anatomy bear the mark of deep evolutionary refinement. Along their legs and bodies, thousands of tiny sensory hairs serve as extensions of their nervous systems. These are not mere bristles, but exquisitely sensitive instruments capable of detecting vibrations smaller than a human hair's width. They can sense changes in air pressure that signal the wing beats of a passing insect, the subtle movements of a burrowing prey beneath the soil, or even the distant approach of a predator. Some species have evolved specialized organs, like slit sensilla, that allow them to detect stresses in their exoskeleton, functioning almost like a sixth sense. These sensory systems give arachnids an extraordinary awareness of their surroundings, often allowing them to react before potential prey or predators are even aware of their presence. The influence of these traits reaches far beyond arachnids themselves. Venom has shaped evolutionary arms races, pushing prey to develop chemical resistance or behavioral adaptations that help them avoid stings. The strength and versatility of silk have forced flying insects to evolve sharper vision, more erratic flight paths, and better reflexes to escape the nearly invisible traps. Even the sensitivity of arachnid sensory hairs has influenced the behaviors of animals that share their habitats, encouraging them to move more quietly or shift their activity patterns to evade detection. Each of these traits, the exoskeleton, venom, silk, and sensory systems, tells a story of adaptation and refinement over vast stretches of time. They reveal how survival strategies can evolve from simple solutions into highly specialized tools, and how those tools continue to shape the living world long after their original purpose has shifted. Modern arachnids no longer dominate the planet as they once did, but their evolutionary heritage continues to ripple through ecosystems everywhere. Every time a spider senses a vibration in its web, a scorpion immobilizes prey with a perfectly tuned toxin, or a silk strand catches the wind and lifts a young spider skyward. It is a living demonstration of solutions, first tested hundreds of millions of years ago. These are not just remnants of ancient biology. They are active, dynamic strategies that continue to shape life today. And in every crevice, burrow, and web, they remind us that the story of arachnids is not simply a tale of the distant past, but one still being written, thread by thread, sting by sting, and step by careful step. The ancient dynasties of the arachnids no longer tower over the land, but their descendants remain deeply woven into the fabric of modern ecosystems. Their bodies may be smaller, and their presence less dramatic than the monsters that once crawled through Carboniferous forests, yet they still hold some of the most vital roles in nature's living machinery. From the soil beneath our feet to the beams of city bridges, from arid deserts to the canopies of rainforests, arachnids shape the rhythms of life in ways that are often invisible yet profoundly important. Across the world today, spiders form one of the largest and most influential groups of terrestrial predators. Scientists estimate that they consume hundreds of millions of tons of insects each year, a silent and relentless service that keeps ecosystems in balance. Their strategies are astonishingly diverse. The orb weavers, for instance, construct intricate, symmetrical webs that span gaps between branches and catch flying insects with exquisite efficiency. Sheetweb spiders stretch horizontal nets across grasses and forest floors, while funnel web builders construct silk-lined tunnels that funnel prey straight into their waiting jaws. Other species, like the wolf spiders, rely on patience and pursuit, stalking beetles and grasshoppers across the ground, while jumping spiders use precision leaps, guided by their exceptional vision to ambush victims. Even the trapdoor spiders, hidden beneath camouflaged lids of soil and silk, rely on perfect timing and sensitivity to vibrations to spring from the earth and seize their prey. Each of these methods plays a role in regulating insect populations, preventing outbreaks that could devastate plant life, and ensuring that energy continues to flow through the food web in a balanced way. Scorpions take up a different niche, occupying the role of stealthy nocturnal hunters. Emerging under the cover of darkness, they scour the ground for insects, small vertebrates, and even other arachnids. Their methods are as ancient as their lineage. Finely tuned sensory hairs detect the faintest tremor of footsteps, and once prey is within reach, a combination of powerful pincers and venomous stings ensures a swift kill. Some species rely on brute strength to crush their prey, while others use venom potent enough to incapacitate animals many times their size. Their ecological importance goes far beyond their dramatic hunting behavior. By preying on herbivorous insects, scorpions help regulate plant consumption and nutrient cycling. In desert ecosystems, where life operates on a knife edge, their ability to survive on minimal resources and control insect populations helps maintain the fragile balance of those harsh landscapes. Mites and ticks, though far smaller and often overlooked, may be the most ecologically influential arachnids of all. Their diversity is staggering, with millions of species estimated to exist, many of them still undescribed. Soil mites play a crucial role in decomposition, breaking down leaf litter, fungi, and other organic material, which releases nutrients back into the soil and supports plant growth. Other species live symbiotically on animals, cleaning skin and feathers, or inside nests, where they recycle waste into usable nutrients. Parasitic ticks feed on the blood of mammals, birds, and reptiles, forming key links in disease transmission networks and influencing population dynamics of their hosts. Even though many humans view them as pests, their ecological impact is undeniable, and their presence shapes everything from soil chemistry to mammal migration patterns. Arachnids also serve as prey themselves, anchoring food webs by supporting countless other species. Birds, small mammals, reptiles, and even other arthropods depend on them as a critical source of energy. Their abundance and accessibility make them foundational components of terrestrial ecosystems, linking primary producers to higher predators in ways that are often invisible but essential. For instance, the decline of spider populations in certain regions has been shown to ripple through ecosystems, leading to surges in insect numbers and shifts in plant communities, demonstrating how much depends on their silent work. Their adaptability has ensured their presence in even the most unexpected places. Some spiders thrive exclusively in human-built environments, spinning webs inside buildings or beneath streetlights where swarms of insects gather. Urban scorpions lurk in cracks between pavement stones, emerging when night falls to hunt cockroaches and crickets. Dust mites thrive in our homes, living in bedding and carpets, recycling microscopic flakes of skin. Even parasites like ticks have expanded their range alongside mammals, following deer and rodents into new territories shaped by human development. Arachnids are not relics lingering on the edges of ecosystems. They are active participants, constantly adjusting to new challenges and exploiting new opportunities. These interactions ripple far beyond the arachnids themselves. The predation pressure spiders place on insects influences pollination networks and plant reproduction. Scorpions help stabilize small vertebrate populations and regulate nutrient cycling in arid ecosystems. Mites' recycling of organic material affects soil fertility, which in turn affects the plants that support entire food chains. In every ecosystem they inhabit, arachnids act as regulators, recyclers, and connectors, ensuring that energy and nutrients continue to flow. Their story is not one of static survival, but of continual integration into the evolving web of life. They are hunters and prey, decomposers and regulators, parasites and partners. Their presence shapes landscapes and species interactions on scales both vast and microscopic. Every thread of silk stretched across a forest path, every scorpion stalking beneath a moonlit rock, every mite breaking down the detritus of a forest floor contributes to the complex, interconnected systems that sustain life on Earth. The empire that once belonged to the arachnids may have transformed into something quieter and less visible, but their influence is everywhere. They no longer dominate through size or spectacle, but through subtlety, diversity, and an unmatched capacity to fill ecological roles. In the endless exchange of energy and life that defines our planet, the eight-legged still hold a place of immense power, woven into the natural order as deeply as any vertebrate predator or towering tree. For as long as humans have existed, we have shared the world with spiders. They have watched us from corners of caves and woven their webs in the rafters of our homes. They have lived in the shadows of our stories and our myths, appearing as symbols of patience, danger, mystery, or deceit. And yet, despite their small size and mostly harmless nature, they inspire a fear that runs deeper than almost any other. Across cultures and continents, across language and time, humans have recoiled from the sight of 8 legs skittering across a wall. That fear, known as arachnophobia, is one of the most common phobias in the world, and its roots stretch far deeper than most people realize. Part of this widespread fear is woven into our biology. Fear, at its core, is not a flaw but a survival tool, one that evolution honed over millions of years to keep our ancestors alive. The early mammals that crept through forests in the shadow of the dinosaurs needed quick instincts to avoid predators and poisons. Those that hesitated often did not survive long enough to pass on their genes. Long before humans appeared, natural selection was shaping nervous systems to respond rapidly to signs of danger, even if those signs were small or fleeting. By the time the first humans appeared in Africa, hundreds of thousands of years ago, spiders had already been perfecting their venom for hundreds of millions of years. Most species were harmless, but a few carried toxins that could cause intense pain, paralysis, or even death. In ancient environments, where medicine did not exist and even a minor infection could be fatal, the consequences of a venomous bite could be severe. Early humans who were cautious around small, fast-moving creatures were more likely to survive than those who were indifferent. Over many generations, that instinctive wariness became deeply embedded in the human mind. It is not just venom that makes spiders unsettling. Their movements are sudden and unpredictable, traits that our brains are wired to notice. The human visual system is exceptionally good at detecting motion in the edges of our vision, a skill that once helped us spot predators lurking in the tall grass. A spider scuttling across a floor triggers that ancient detection system, sending a surge of alertness through the brain before we have even processed what we are looking at. Our bodies react first and think later, a biological echo of the vigilance that once meant the difference between life and death. The shape of spiders may also play a role in our discomfort. Humans evolved to recognize certain patterns as potential threats, and animals with too many legs, too many eyes, or unfamiliar body structures often trigger an instinctive response. Spiders, with their 8 legs, segmented bodies, and multiple eyes, do not fit into the familiar silhouettes of mammals, birds, or reptiles that our ancestors encountered regularly. Their alien appearance taps into a part of the human brain that associates unfamiliar forms with danger, even if no real threat exists. Cultural memory has reinforced this biological foundation. Throughout history, spiders have appeared in myths and legends as creatures of danger and darkness. In some stories, they are cunning tricksters. In others, they are embodiments of evil. Even in societies that revere spiders for their skill or symbolic power, the language surrounding them often carries a sense of unease. Over centuries, these stories have shaped the way people perceive spiders, layering cultural fear on top of instinctive caution. Modern life has done little to erase these ancient responses. Although the vast majority of spiders are harmless and many are beneficial, eating pests and helping maintain ecological balance, our brains still respond to them as if they are potential threats. The sight of a spider often triggers a rapid chain reaction. The heart rate rises, muscles tense, and adrenaline floods the bloodstream. This is the same fight or flight response that once prepared our ancestors to face predators, now activated by a creature small enough to crush under a thumb. Even those who know, rationally, that a spider cannot harm them may feel their skin crawl or their breath quicken when one appears unexpectedly. There is also an element of control at play. Humans are deeply attuned to their surroundings, and we find comfort in predictability. Spiders defy that comfort. They appear suddenly and vanish just as quickly, slipping into unseen corners. Their webs seem to materialize overnight in places that were empty the day before. This unpredictability, combined with their alien movements and silent presence, makes them feel like intruders in a space we believe we control. Arachnophobia, then, is not a weakness or an irrational flaw. It is a window into our evolutionary past, a reminder of the countless generations that learned caution the hard way. It is the echo of a world where venom could kill and where small dangers hid in plain sight. And though we now live in a world where spiders are more likely to eat a mosquito than harm a human, that deep memory still lives within us, passed down in the language of nerves and reflexes. Every startled gasp, every involuntary shiver, every quick glance toward a dark corner connects us, in some small way, to the ancient humans who first looked warily at 8 legs and decided it was safer to keep their distance. There are places on Earth where life should not exist, places where the ground bakes beneath a relentless sun, where the air is so dry that water vanishes before it can soak into the soil. Other places lie under skies that never rise above freezing, where ice locks the land in silence and winter swallows the world for months at a time. Yet even in these inhospitable realms, life persists, and among the creatures that endure, few are as resilient, as ingenious, or as quietly determined as the arachnids. Deserts are some of the harshest environments on the planet. Rain falls rarely, often not at all, and when it does, the ground drinks it in greedily before the sun can evaporate it. Temperatures soar during the day and plummet at night. Many animals avoid such extremes by hiding underground or migrating elsewhere. Scorpions, however, have made these landscapes their home. They have done so not by resisting the desert's rules, but by mastering them. One of their greatest strengths is their efficiency. Scorpions lose almost no water through their exoskeletons, and they can survive for months without eating or drinking. Their metabolism slows to a crawl when resources are scarce, allowing them to endure long periods of scarcity with little more than the moisture they absorb from their prey. When an insect or small lizard wanders too close, the scorpion's sensitive hairs detect the faint vibrations of its steps. With a sudden strike of its pincers and a precise injection of venom, the scorpion subdues its meal and absorbs the precious nutrients it needs to survive. Even the way scorpions hunt shows how perfectly adapted they are to their surroundings. Many species remain hidden beneath rocks or buried in sand during the scorching daylight hours, emerging only after dusk when the air cools. Their eyes, though simple, are sensitive enough to detect faint traces of light, and their legs are lined with receptors that can sense the subtlest movements in the ground. In this way, they become nearly invisible predators, thriving in a place where most life struggles to survive. Far from the heat and dryness of the desert, other arachnids face the opposite challenge. In the frozen reaches of the Arctic and subarctic, where temperatures can plunge far below freezing and the land is covered in ice and snow, spiders have found ways to persist. They cannot flee the cold, so they have learned to live with it. Some Arctic spiders have developed a remarkable ability to produce antifreeze-like compounds in their bodies. These chemicals prevent ice crystals from forming in their tissues, allowing them to survive temperatures that would kill most other animals. Many enter a state of dormancy during the coldest months, their metabolism slowing almost to a halt until the brief summer returns. Others remain active beneath the snow, where the layer of ice insulates them from the worst of the cold and where they can still find tiny insects or springtails to feed on. Their life cycles, too, are shaped by the rhythm of their environment. In the far north, the growing season is short, and the window for hunting and breeding is narrow. Arctic spiders have adapted to this by growing quickly, maturing rapidly, and producing their eggs in time for the next generation to hatch during the fleeting warmth of summer. It is a delicate balance, a carefully tuned strategy that has allowed them to endure in conditions that would seem utterly inhospitable. The adaptability of arachnids extends far beyond deserts and ice fields. Some species live in high-altitude mountain ranges where oxygen is thin and temperatures swing wildly between day and night. Others inhabit caves that never see sunlight, surviving on the smallest traces of organic matter brought in by groundwater or drifting air. There are spiders that live on the surface of freshwater ponds, trapping bubbles of air to breathe underwater, and scorpions that climb into trees, hunting among the branches like miniature panthers. Each environment presents its own challenges, and in each, arachnids have evolved elegant solutions. What unites them all is not size, strength, or speed, but resilience. They are not relics of a bygone age, clinging to survival in the margins of a changing world. They are innovators, continually adapting to new pressures and new possibilities. The same lineage that once produced house cat-sized predators now gives rise to creatures that thrive in conditions more extreme than any their ancestors ever faced. They endure not because they have remained unchanged, but because they have changed in ways that allow them to endure. Even now, hundreds of millions of years after they first conquered land, arachnids remain among Earth's most versatile survivors. Their presence in the most unforgiving corners of the planet is a quiet testament to the power of evolution. From the blazing sands of the Sahara to the frozen tundra of the Arctic Circle, they continue their ancient story, unfolding not in the grand theaters of dominance they once commanded, but in the subtle art of survival. They are reminders that life, when given time, finds a way to thrive not just in comfort, but in the most unlikely places. Everywhere we look, life unfolds in familiar shapes. Birds wheel through the skies, mammals graze across open plains, reptiles bask on sun warmed stones. These are the creatures that capture our attention, the ones that fill nature documentaries and textbooks. Yet hidden beneath leaves and tucked into the crevices of bark, clinging to the fur of animals and the roots of plants, there exists a far larger and more ancient realm of life that most of us rarely notice. It is a world dominated not by vertebrates, but by arachnids. There are more species of arachnids on Earth than there are mammals, birds, and reptiles combined. Tens of thousands have been described, and scientists believe tens of thousands more are waiting to be discovered. They inhabit nearly every environment imaginable, from the hottest deserts to the coldest tundra, from mountain peaks to the depths of caves. Many are small enough to pass through the eye of a needle, while others are large enough to catch small vertebrates. Yet despite their astonishing diversity and abundance, most of them live quiet, hidden lives. They are the unseen majority, shaping the planet in ways that few people ever realize. Ticks are among the most familiar of these hidden arachnids, though rarely by choice. They have evolved as parasites, living on the blood of vertebrates. Their lives revolve around patience and precision. A tick will climb to the tip of a blade of grass or a low shrub and wait, front legs outstretched, sensing the carbon dioxide and heat given off by passing animals. When the moment is right, it latches on, piercing the skin with specialized mouthparts that anchor it firmly in place. The meal it draws can sustain it for weeks or even months. Though they are often seen as pests, ticks play a complex role in ecosystems, moving nutrients between species and influencing population dynamics in subtle ways. Mites, their close relatives, are even more numerous. They are among the smallest arachnids, with many species invisible to the naked eye, yet their ecological importance is immense. Some feed on decaying organic matter, breaking down leaf litter and recycling nutrients back into the soil. Others prey on tiny insects and their eggs, keeping pest populations in check. Certain mites form symbiotic relationships with plants or animals, cleaning them or providing protection. A few are parasites, living in the feathers of birds or the lungs of mammals. There are mites that inhabit hot springs, those that dwell deep underground, and others that live in our homes, feeding on flakes of shed skin. They are everywhere, an invisible but essential part of the living world. Harvestmen, sometimes called daddy longlegs, belong to a different branch of the arachnid family tree. Unlike spiders, their bodies are fused into a single oval shape, and they lack venom or silk. They are gentle wanderers, feeding mostly on decaying plant material, fungi, and small insects. Their long, delicate legs make them graceful climbers, and their simple eyes are tuned to movement in the dim light of forest floors and cave mouths. Though harmless to humans, harvestmen play a vital role in decomposition, returning nutrients to the soil and supporting the web of life from beneath. Then there are the pseudoscorpions, tiny predators that look like scorpions without the tail and stinger. Many are smaller than a grain of rice, and most people will go their entire lives without noticing one. Yet they live in abundance in leaf litter, under bark, and even in the dust of homes and libraries. Their pincer-like claws are tipped with venom glands, allowing them to seize and subdue prey many times their size. Pseudoscorpions often hitch rides on larger insects, clinging to legs or wings to travel long distances. This behavior, called foracy, allows them to spread into new habitats and maintain their presence across the globe. Each of these groups plays a role in the vast machinery of ecosystems. Ticks and mites help regulate animal populations and recycle nutrients. Harvestmen and pseudoscorpions help control insect numbers and speed the decay of organic matter. Spiders, scorpions, and other predators keep herbivore populations in balance, preventing outbreaks that could devastate plants and crops. Together, they form a network of interactions that underpins the stability of ecosystems on land. Despite their importance, arachnids remain largely out of sight. Their small size and secretive habits keep them hidden in soil, under bark, within moss, or in the fur of animals. They go unnoticed not because they are rare, but because they are everywhere. Every handful of forest floor holds hundreds of mites. Every square meter of grassland hides ticks and pseudoscorpions waiting for a passing host. Even the air carries spiders that balloon on silken threads, drifting on currents that carry them across continents. They are the quiet workers of the natural world, weaving invisible threads through every habitat on Earth. Their presence is constant, their influence profound, though we seldom see them. They shape the soil beneath our feet, the balance of life in forests and fields, and the health of the creatures that share the planet with us. In their numbers and their diversity, they remind us that the story of life is not always written in the bold strokes of the visible and the grand. Often, it is whispered in the movements of the unseen. Beneath every heartbeat and every breath lies a language written in the same four chemical letters. It hums quietly inside every cell of every living thing, unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. This molecular script, called DNA, records the history of life far more deeply than fossils ever could. It tells a story of shared solutions, of old inventions repurposed for new challenges, and of genetic tools so effective that evolution has never set them aside. And hidden within that story is a surprising truth. Some of the most fundamental instructions that shape the human body were first tested in creatures with hard shells and jointed legs. Arthropods were among the earliest animals to build complex body plans, and in doing so, they pioneered genetic systems that remain at the heart of animal development today. One of the most profound examples of this is a family of genes known as Hox genes. These genes act as master architects during embryonic development. They do not build tissues directly, but instead orchestrate where and when other genes turn on. They divide an embryo into regions, instructing one area to grow a head, another to form limbs, and another to create the structures of the rear. In a spider embryo, they mark out where its legs will sprout and how its body will segment into functional parts. In a human embryo, they determine the pattern of the spine, the placement of limbs, and the structure of the nervous system. What makes this connection remarkable is how little the fundamental logic has changed. Despite the vast gulf of time and form between a scorpion and a human, the sequence of Hox genes in our genomes follows the same spatial order along the body axis. A gene that controls head formation in a horseshoe crab plays a comparable role in defining the head region of a vertebrate embryo. This conserved arrangement, known as collinearity, is one of evolution's most striking signatures. It shows that, rather than inventing new genetic blueprints from scratch, life has repeatedly modified an ancient toolkit to build bodies as different as a tarantula and a human being. The story of shared molecular machinery extends far beyond body plans. Deep inside our cells, genes that govern cell division, tissue growth, and organ formation can trace their ancestry back to early arthropods. The genes that regulate the timing of molting in arachnids, for instance, are part of the same hormonal pathways that guide growth spurts in vertebrates. These pathways rely on steroid-like molecules that trigger cascades of cellular activity, coordinating development across the entire body. The chemical messages have diversified over time, but the fundamental communication system remains the same. The parallels reach into the nervous system as well. Many of the molecular components that neurons use to transmit signals evolved long before vertebrates appeared. Neurotransmitters such as dopamine, serotonin, and acetylcholine, essential to human thought, memory, and emotion, are also used by spiders and insects to coordinate movement, process sensory information, and regulate behavior. Even the genes that control how neurons connect to one another and form networks show deep homology. These shared molecular mechanisms reveal that the foundations of complex brains were laid down in much simpler nervous systems hundreds of millions of years ago. Our immune defenses, too, have ancient roots that stretch back to arthropods. Long before vertebrates evolved sophisticated, adaptive immunity with antibodies and memory cells, arthropods relied on innate immune responses to fight infections. They produced pattern recognition receptors that could detect common features of bacteria and fungi, triggering cascades of defensive molecules. Many of these molecular pathways have recognizable counterparts in vertebrates today. Toll-like receptors, a key component of the human innate immune system, were first characterized in fruit flies, where they serve a similar role in detecting microbial invaders. Even the inflammatory responses that cause redness and swelling in humans can be traced to signaling systems present in ancient arthropods. Another layer of molecular continuity lies in the genetic regulation of development itself. Families of transcription factors, proteins that switch other genes on or off, were first deployed in arthropods to control when cells differentiated into specialized types. PAX genes, for example, help shape the visual systems of spiders and insects, guiding the development of simple eyes. In vertebrates, related PAX genes orchestrate the formation of complex structures, like retinas, and even contribute to brain patterning. These echoes across time show that the genetic logic behind sensory systems and organ formation was established long before vertebrates evolved their own elaborate versions. Even processes as fundamental as energy metabolism reveal shared ancestry. Arthropods and vertebrates use many of the same enzymes to break down glucose, store energy, and manage oxidative stress. Some of these enzymes have changed little since the Cambrian period, testifying to their effectiveness. The way cells regulate oxygen consumption, manage free radicals, and repair molecular damage is part of a biochemical legacy that predates the divergence of vertebrates and arthropods. This molecular continuity does not mean that humans and spiders are close relatives in any obvious sense. Our lineages diverged hundreds of millions of years ago, and natural selection has shaped each in dramatically different ways. Yet the underlying genetic toolkit remains deeply shared. It is as if evolution wrote a master manual long ago and has been revising and expanding it ever since, rather than starting fresh with every new branch of life. Every pulse of a human heart, every synapse firing in a human brain, and every immune cell rushing to meet an invader relies on molecular machinery that first took shape in ancient arthropods. Their experiments with gene regulation, body patterning, immunity, and neural communication created solutions so effective that they remain in use today. The bodies we inhabit and the systems that sustain us are not new inventions, but refinements of ideas that first emerged in creatures with segmented bodies and jointed legs. Hidden in our genomes, their legacy continues to guide the unfolding story of life, written not in stone, but in the language of genes. Beneath our feet, in the silent layers of stone, lies a story written not in words, but in traces. It is a record shaped by pressure, time, and chants a record of the arachnids and their kin, preserved not as living beings, but as echoes of their presence. Each fossil is a frozen moment, a fragment of behavior or anatomy suspended across hundreds of millions of years. And though many of those fragments are small, even the tiniest of them can open a window into a world that once crawled, spun, and hunted beneath forests, long turned to coal. Some of the most revealing of these windows are not bodies at all, but footsteps. In the late Silurian and early Devonian rocks of what is now the United Kingdom, for example, paleontologists have uncovered trackways pressed into soft mud by the feet of ancient arachnids. These ichnofossils capture movements that no skeleton could ever reveal. A meandering line of prints records a slow, deliberate hunt across the damp shoreline of a vanished sea. Sudden changes in stride hint at moments of pursuit or panic, the ghost of a chase imprinted into the earth itself. In one remarkable site, a set of parallel trackways appears to show a predator following another creature's trail, perhaps stalking it through the low vegetation that once fringed the water's edge. Each set of tracks is a direct link to behavior, an animal's decision, its speed, even its posture preserved in stone. Body fossils tell another part of the story. Like all arthropods, ancient arachnids molted as they grew, shedding their exoskeletons in fragile sheets that sometimes settled into mud and were buried before they decayed. These shed shells, called exuviae, are among the most detailed fossils we possess. Under a microscope, they reveal the fine texture of sensory hairs, the arrangement of claws, and the shapes of stingers and mouthparts. From such features, scientists can infer how these creatures sensed their environment, what kind of prey they targeted, and how their hunting strategies evolved. In rare cases, entire bodies are preserved, such as the beautifully detailed fossils of Devonian trigonoderbids, spider-like arachnids with segmented abdomens and specialized limbs, whose anatomy reveals early adaptations for a fully terrestrial lifestyle. Some of the most intimate glimpses into arachnid life come from an unlikely source: ancient tree resin. When resin hardened into amber, it trapped small organisms inside, preserving them with astonishing fidelity. These amber inclusions offer a level of detail that rock rarely can. In Baltic amber dating back tens of millions of years, spiders are found with their fangs poised mid-strike, locked forever in the instant before they subdued their prey. A piece of Cretaceous amber from Myanmar contains a spider and the insect it had just ensnared in its silk, a perfect snapshot of predator and prey, their final interaction immortalized together. Other pieces reveal ecological relationships, pseudoscorpions clinging to the legs of beetles, using them as transport between forest patches, or mites parasitizing ancient insects. Even strands of silk, spun across bits of bark, and still sticky after millions of years, tell stories of web-building strategies and habitat use that shaped entire ecosystems. Some fossils hint at behaviors far more complex than solitary hunting. In a remarkable find from the Carboniferous, the remains of multiple juvenile arachnids were discovered, clustered together inside what appears to be the remains of a burrow. Their arrangement suggests a form of parental care, a behavior still seen in modern scorpions and some spiders. Elsewhere, fossilized egg sacs preserved alongside adult bodies hint at reproductive strategies and nesting behaviors. These rare snapshots remind us that the lives of ancient arachnids were not just about survival and predation, but also about reproduction, care, and interaction behaviors that shaped their success across deep time. Trace evidence also helps scientists reconstruct the broader environment these creatures inhabited. Fossilized silk threads found in ancient sediments show how spiders adapted their web structures to different landscapes. Some webs appear stretched between fragments of ancient vegetation, suggesting forest edge habitats, while others were built low to the ground, hinting at ambush strategies among leaf litter. Even coprolites' fossilized droppings provide insights into diet, sometimes containing fragments of insect exoskeletons that reveal the prey preferences of long vanished hunters. Each discovery also helps refine the timeline of arachnid evolution. For decades, the oldest known terrestrial arachnid fossils were thought to date to the early Devonian. Then a Silurian specimen from Scotland, more than 430 million years old, pushed their history deeper into the past. Similarly, Cretaceous amber has revealed spider families far older and more diverse than previously believed, reshaping our understanding of when modern lineages emerged. As imaging technology advances, new techniques like synchrotron scanning allow researchers to peer inside opaque fossils, reconstructing delicate internal structures such as respiratory organs or muscle attachments, details once thought forever lost. Together, these discoveries paint a picture far richer than bones or shells alone could provide. They show arachnids not as static relics, but as dynamic participants in their ancient worlds, stalking prey across mudflats, weaving traps between ferns, tending their young in sheltered burrows. They reveal predator-prey relationships, ecological roles, and evolutionary experiments played out on the stage of deep time. And though many mysteries remain buried, each new fossil brings us a little closer to understanding how these extraordinary animals lived, hunted, and thrived in the landscapes of the distant past. In the stillness of rock and resin, their movements endure. A ripple of footprints across hardened mud, a delicate strand of silk frozen in amber, a hunter locked in the act of striking, all are fragments of a story still being pieced together, a story written by the eight-legged architects of Earth's ancient worlds. It is strange to imagine a world where vertebrates never rose to dominance. Strange, because so much of what we know about Earth's ecosystems is shaped by the presence of animals with backbones, fish patrolling the oceans, reptiles basking in sunlight, mammals roaming grasslands, and birds filling the skies. But evolution is not destiny. It is a branching tree with many possible paths, and history is simply the one that happened to unfold. If the rise of vertebrates had been halted early on, if arachnids and their arthropod relatives had remained the planet's ruling predators, life on Earth would look profoundly different. The first and most striking difference would be scale. Without vertebrates to compete with, arthropods might never have been forced into smaller niches. Oxygen levels, climate, and physiology would still shape their size, but natural selection would likely have pushed them toward larger and more complex forms. The giant scorpions of the Carboniferous might have grown even larger, perhaps rivaling the size of wolves or small crocodiles. Predatory spiders could have developed powerful musculature within their exoskeletons, allowing them to chase prey on land rather than relying solely on ambush and webs. The image of a human-sized arachnid stalking prey through a forest floor sounds like fiction, but in a vertebrate-free world, such giants might have been entirely possible. Ecosystems would also have been structured differently. Today, vertebrates often dominate the roles of apex predators, herbivores, and scavengers. In their absence, arthropods would have filled those niches. Instead of packs of canids hunting on open plains, enormous communal arachnids might have hunted cooperatively, using silk or venom to subdue prey. Large herbivorous arthropods, perhaps descended from millipede-like ancestors, might have grazed on ferns and early flowering plants, their segmented bodies moving like living walls across the landscape. Even the role of aerial predators could have belonged to the arthropods. Dragonflies the size of hawks might have evolved keen vision and elaborate hunting strategies, patrolling the skies in search of smaller flying insects. The absence of vertebrates would have influenced the evolution of plants as well. Many plants evolved alongside vertebrate pollinators and seed dispersers. If arthropods remained dominant, flowering plants might still have emerged, but their strategies would likely be more closely tied to insect-like pollinators and carriers. Fruits might have remained smaller, adapted for transport by swarming arthropods rather than large mammals or birds. Flowers could have evolved in shapes and colors suited to the vision and behaviors of these dominant species. Forests might hum and crawl with life in a way that is difficult to picture today, with complex networks of arthropod pollinators and grazers shaping the flow of nutrients through entire ecosystems. The structure of intelligence and social behavior might have followed a different path too. Vertebrates, especially mammals and birds, are known for their complex brains and intricate social structures. Arthropods, however, approach intelligence in distributed ways. Social insects like ants, termites, and bees demonstrate collective decision-making and sophisticated cooperation without large individual brains. If arachnids and their kin had remained dominant, evolution might have favored swarm intelligence or colony-based societies on a much larger scale. Instead of single, highly intelligent predators like wolves or big cats, the planet could be ruled by vast cooperative hunting groups, communicating through chemical signals, vibrations, or even light patterns. Even the course of evolution itself might have been slower and more conservative. Vertebrates, with their internal skeletons and flexible body plans, have diversified rapidly into countless forms. Arthropods, though extraordinarily successful, are often more constrained by their exoskeletons and segmented bodies. Over hundreds of millions of years, their body plans might have diversified, but perhaps less dramatically. Life would still have explored a breathtaking range of forms, but many of them would be variations on the arthropod blueprint. Segmented predators, silk-spinning hunters, and armored grazers filling the land, sea, and air. The oceans, too, would have followed a different story. Fish would never have risen to dominance, and the evolutionary arms race between aquatic vertebrates and their prey would never have happened. Instead, giant eurypterids or crustacean-like predators might still reign beneath the waves. Coral reefs could be patrolled by shrimp-like hunters the size of dolphins, and plankton blooms might be filtered by colossal arthropods with intricate feeding appendages. The balance of marine life, from the smallest organisms to the largest predators, would follow different rules. And then there is the most speculative question of all. What would intelligence and civilization look like in a world without vertebrates? Could an arthropod lineage have developed tool use, language, or even technology? The distributed neural systems of many arthropods might lend themselves to entirely different forms of cognition. Perhaps instead of individual thinkers building machines, collective minds would build organic cities, woven from silk and resin, sprawling across landscapes like living networks. If intelligence emerged at all, it might look nothing like our own. The world shaped by arachnids would still be diverse, dynamic, and full of life. It would teem with predators and prey, with cycles of growth, competition, and adaptation. But its details would be profoundly alien to us. It would be a world where 8 legs, not 4, defined the shape of power, where silk replaced sinew, and where the rhythms of life move to the pulse of an ancient exoskeleton blueprint. It is a reminder that the story of life is not inevitable. The path we know was just one of many that evolution could have taken. For hundreds of millions of years, arachnids have perfected the art of survival. Their story is older than forests, older than reptiles, older even than the first vertebrates to crawl onto land. They were among the first animals to master the hunt, to engineer silk stronger than steel by weight, to sense the faintest tremors in the dark. And although their time as Earth's dominant predators has long passed, the legacy of their design still echoes through the natural world, and now, increasingly, through human technology. In laboratories and workshops around the globe, scientists and engineers are studying arachnids not simply as ancient curiosities, but as teachers. Their strategies, refined over ages, are shaping the future of robotics, materials science, and sensing in ways that could one day transform how we live. The most obvious lesson comes from silk. Long before humans learned to spin thread or weave cloth, spiders were creating materials of extraordinary strength and versatility. Silk is a protein fiber produced in glands within a spider's body, drawn out through specialized structures called spinnerets. It can be sticky or dry, stretchy or stiff, depending on its purpose. Some silks absorb impacts, others anchor webs to rock or bark, and some form egg sacs or protective retreats. Weight for weight, many silks are stronger than steel and tougher than Kevlar, yet they are light, biodegradable, and produced at room temperature from water-based solutions. This natural engineering has captivated scientists for decades. Researchers have studied the molecular structure of silk to design new synthetic fibers for use in medical sutures, bulletproof vests, and parachute cords. Some have even engineered bacteria and plants to produce spider silk proteins, hoping to create sustainable alternatives to traditional plastics and textiles. The silk's combination of strength, elasticity, and lightness is unmatched in the human world, and its secrets continue to inspire new approaches to materials science. Beyond silk, arachnids offer lessons in mechanics and movement. Spiders and scorpions rely on hydraulic systems to move their legs. Instead of using muscles alone, they pump fluid into their limbs, extending them with remarkable precision and speed. This allows them to move with a combination of strength and delicacy, climbing vertical surfaces, leaping great distances, and manipulating prey with finesse. Engineers designing soft robots machines that mimic the flexibility and adaptability of living organisms have drawn directly from these principles. Hydraulic and pneumatic systems modeled on arachnid anatomy are helping robots explore environments too dangerous or delicate for traditional machines, from collapsed buildings to the surfaces of other planets. Some of the most fascinating innovations come from how arachnids sense their surroundings. Many spiders and scorpions have poor vision, yet they can detect the slightest vibration through the ground or air. Tiny hairs and slit-like sensors on their exoskeletons pick up changes as subtle as the footsteps of nearby prey or the shifting of the wind. These sensory systems are so sensitive that they can detect frequencies beyond the reach of most modern instruments. Scientists are now studying these biological sensors to develop more responsive motion detectors, earthquake monitoring devices, and even wearable technologies that could read muscle movements directly from the skin. Venom, too, has become a field of exploration. Arachnid venoms are complex cocktails of proteins and peptides, each evolved to target specific physiological systems in prey or predators. Some paralyze nerves, others disrupt blood flow or break down tissue. These molecules are now being studied for their potential in medicine. Compounds derived from spider venom are being tested as painkillers that could be more effective and less addictive than opioids. Others may hold the key to treating heart conditions, autoimmune diseases, or even cancer. The diversity of venoms, shaped over millions of years of evolutionary trial and error, is a vast library of biological tools that scientists are only beginning to unlock. Even the architecture of spider webs has influenced human design. Webs are not random tangles of silk, but precise, optimized structures. They absorb impacts without breaking, distribute force evenly, and can be rebuilt quickly if damaged. These principles have inspired architects and engineers designing lightweight, resilient structures, from bridges and suspension systems to disaster resistant buildings. The radial and spiral patterns of webs also inform data network design, helping scientists model systems that are both efficient and resistant to failure. The more we study arachnids, the clearer it becomes that their evolutionary solutions are not relics of the past, but blueprints for the future. Their bodies, honed by millions of years of natural selection, embody principles of strength, efficiency, adaptability, and sensitivity that human technology still struggles to match. And because arachnids evolved in such diverse environments, deserts, jungles, caves, and tundra, their strategies are versatile enough to be applied to an equally wide range of human challenges. Each new discovery reveals another lesson. A strand of silk may teach us how to build stronger bridges. A scorpion's sensory hairs may lead to better prosthetics. A venom molecule might become a life-saving drug. These connections remind us that nature's most successful hunters are not just remnants of an ancient age, but partners in innovation. Their story is still unfolding, not only in the ecosystems they inhabit, but in the tools and technologies that shape our own future. The world they once ruled continues to shape ours, one silent design at a time. In the dim light of the Silurian world, long before forests cloaked the continents or vertebrates had learned to walk on land, small, jointed hunters crept from the shallows and began a journey that would never end. They were not the fastest creatures of their time, nor the most imposing, but they possessed qualities far more valuable than brute strength: adaptability, efficiency, and the ability to thrive when the world changed around them. These qualities would become the foundation of a lineage that has endured for nearly 500 million years. They would allow arachnids to survive every upheaval Earth could offer, from fire and ice to extinction and rebirth. Their ancestors, the eurypterids, were formidable predators of ancient seas, their paddle-like limbs propelling them through warm waters as they hunted trilobites and early fish. From that lineage came the first explorers of land creatures that learned to breathe air, support their weight without buoyancy, and stalk prey across a new, unclaimed realm. Those early scorpion-like forms did not merely adapt to land, they reshaped it. As the first complex terrestrial predators, they forced other organisms to evolve in response, creating the first predator-prey arms races on dry ground. But the key to their long survival was not their dominance, it was their capacity to change. Through hundreds of millions of years, Earth transformed again and again, and each transformation might have been the end for a less flexible lineage. Oceans rose and vanished. Continents collided, drifted apart, and recombined. Climates swung wildly between tropical warmth and frozen wastelands. Oxygen levels climbed to levels unseen since then fell again, and at least 5 times, mass extinctions wiped away the majority of life. Arachnids did not simply endure these changes by chance. They persisted because they could bend without breaking. Part of their resilience comes from their physiology. Arachnids are masters of resource use, capable of slowing their metabolism to survive months without food or water. Some scorpions can enter a near dormant state during droughts, reviving with the first hint of rain. Their exoskeletons, lightweight yet strong, protect them from desiccation and predators while requiring far fewer resources to maintain than a vertebrate skeleton. Their respiratory systems, though ancient in design, are efficient enough to operate in a range of oxygen conditions, from the rich atmosphere of the Carboniferous to the thinner air of modern Earth. And their venom, evolved for predation and defense, is not just a weapon, but an energy-saving adaptation, allowing them to subdue prey quickly without prolonged struggles. Their reproductive strategies have also played a crucial role in their longevity. Many arachnids invest heavily in parental care, guarding eggs or carrying young until they are capable of independence. Some spiders wrap their eggs in silken sacs that regulate moisture and temperature, while scorpions carry their newborns on their backs, protecting them during their most vulnerable stage. These strategies increase survival rates even when environmental conditions fluctuate wildly, ensuring that populations can rebound quickly after catastrophic events. Another reason for their persistence lies in their ecological flexibility. Arachnids have evolved to exploit a staggering range of niches. Some are ambush hunters that wait patiently in burrows, while others actively chase prey across open ground. Web-spinning spiders have mastered aerial hunting, while specialized mites live entirely within soil microhabitats, feeding on fungi, detritus, or microscopic animals. Some species are highly specialized, thriving in narrow ecological conditions, while others are generalists that can adapt to nearly any environment, from rainforest canopies to urban basements. This diversity of strategies acts as a buffer against extinction. When one niche disappears, another remains. Their adaptability extends even to their interactions with other species. Many arachnids have evolved symbiotic relationships that expand their ecological reach. Certain mites, for example, hitch rides on beetles or flies to disperse into new environments. Others live as commensals, or even parasites, integrating themselves into complex food webs rather than competing against them. This ability to coexist, rather than simply compete, has allowed arachnids to thrive alongside newer and more complex organisms. When mass extinctions struck from the Permian catastrophe that erased more than 90% of species, to the asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs, arachnids were among the survivors. Their small size allowed them to hide where larger predators could not. Their varied diets let them subsist on whatever remained when ecosystems collapsed. Their reproductive resilience and rapid generation times helped populations recover quickly. While many dominant groups vanished, arachnids slipped into the cracks of survival and waited for the world to stabilize. As vertebrates rose to power, arachnids did not vanish into obscurity. Instead, they shifted their strategies once again. They retreated from direct competition with larger predators and specialized in roles that vertebrates could not fill. They became the regulators of insect populations, the recyclers of organic matter, and the engineers of soil ecosystems. They claimed the spaces beneath bark, within leaf litter, and under stones, the hidden layers of the biosphere where life thrives beyond the reach of larger eyes. Today, their reach spans every continent and nearly every habitat on Earth. Their diversity is astonishing. Tens of thousands of species of spiders, thousands of scorpions, and countless mites and ticks, each carrying forward the legacy of their ancestors. Their evolutionary strategies, metabolic thrift, reproductive resilience, ecological versatility, and behavioral adaptability have allowed them to weather every upheaval Earth has thrown their way. Arachnids are not living relics of the past, but active participants in the present, shaped by the same selective forces that once sculpted their Paleozoic ancestors. Their story is one not of stubborn endurance, but of continual reinvention, a lineage that has survived not because it clung to the past, but because it learned, again and again, how to thrive in the future. In the beginning, land was little more than a blank canvas. Shallow soils clung to the edges of lakes and rivers. Thin layers of moss and primitive plants crept hesitantly onto rock, and life's great experiment with dry ground was still in its earliest stages. Yet within this raw, unformed world, small jointed creatures emerged from the water and began to shape the landscape in ways that would echo through all of natural history. They were arachnids and their arthropod relatives, the earliest predators to truly master terrestrial life. And though they did not build mountains or carve valleys, they sculpted the very structure of the ecosystems that would follow. When arachnids first ventured onto land in the Silurian and Devonian periods, the environments they encountered were fragile and unstable. Vegetation grew low to the ground, limited by thin soils that were easily eroded by wind and rain. Without deep root systems to anchor the earth, vast stretches of the terrestrial surface remained barren and inhospitable. Most life clung to damp margins near water, and the interior of continents was nearly empty. Into this precarious world, arachnids brought something entirely new: the dynamic pressure of predation. Before predators appeared, early terrestrial arthropods, such as primitive insects and millipede-like detritivores, fed on plants and decomposing material without restraint. Populations could balloon uncontrollably, stripping away the limited vegetation and destabilizing young ecosystems. The arrival of arachnids changed this balance completely. As the first active terrestrial hunters, they introduced a regulating force into the system. Predation kept herbivore populations in check, preventing runaway consumption and allowing plant life to spread and diversify. This single ecological shift helped stabilize communities and encouraged the development of more complex interactions between species. The influence of predation extended far beyond population control. It acted as a powerful engine of evolution. Prey species that once moved slowly and fed openly now faced new pressures. They evolved speed, agility, and defensive structures like thicker exoskeletons or chemical deterrents. Some developed burrowing behaviors to avoid being seen. Others formed swarms or synchronized life cycles to overwhelm predators with sheer numbers. Every adaptation in prey behavior prompted new hunting strategies in arachnids, and this evolutionary arms race accelerated diversification on both sides. The ripple effects touched everything, from the shape of early insect wings to the sensory systems that would one day guide vertebrate hunters. The ecological changes brought by arachnids were not confined to predator-prey interactions. Their daily activities physically altered the land beneath them. As they moved through the soil, they mixed sediments, improving its structure and helping it retain moisture. Their burrows trapped organic material and created microhabitats for bacteria and fungi, which in turn broke down dead matter and released nutrients. Even the remains of their meals contributed to this process, enriching the soil with nitrogen and phosphorus. These changes built the foundation for deeper, richer soils capable of supporting larger and more complex plants. With time, those plants formed dense root networks, stabilized the ground, and created shade and shelter conditions that supported new waves of terrestrial life. The presence of arachnids also created new opportunities for other organisms. Scavengers and decomposers thrived on the remains of their kills. parasites evolved to exploit them. Symbiotic relationships formed as smaller organisms took advantage of the shelters and burrows they left behind. In this way, arachnids were not only predators, but also catalysts for entire webs of interaction, fostering biodiversity in ecosystems that had once been simple and sparse. When vertebrates eventually emerged from the water in the Devonian period, they entered a world already buzzing with complexity. Insects, regulated by arachnid predation, provided abundant food sources. Plant communities, nourished by enriched soils and stabilized by nutrient cycles, offered habitat and shelter. Predator-prey dynamics, honed over tens of millions of years, had already shaped the reflexes and strategies of terrestrial animals. The vertebrates did not step into a wilderness waiting to be conquered. They arrived in a finely tuned system, one that had been structured, balanced, and refined by arthropods long before their arrival. Even as vertebrates grew larger, faster, and more dominant, the influence of arachnids never waned. They continued to shape ecosystems from the ground up. Spiders became vital regulators of insect populations, preventing outbreaks that could devastate vegetation. Scorpions carved out roles as key soil predators, maintaining balance within subterranean food webs. Tiny mites participated in nutrient cycling and influenced plant growth. Each of these roles sustained the stability of ecosystems and influenced the success of the plants and animals around them. Their impact also extended to the evolutionary paths of other species. Many vertebrates developed specialized hunting strategies to capture arthropods. Some amphibians evolved elongated tongues to snap up quick-moving prey. Birds refined their eyesight to spot spiders and insects from above. Even plants adapted, developing defensive chemicals or physical barriers against the herbivores that arachnids once regulated. The fingerprints of their early presence are visible everywhere in the biological landscape, woven into behaviors, anatomies, and ecological dynamics that persist today. Arachnids did not build the terrestrial world through size or spectacle. Their work was quieter, subtler, and more fundamental. By imposing predation pressure, they stabilized ecosystems and fueled evolution. By enriching soils and altering physical habitats, they enabled plants to expand across the continents. By shaping interactions among species, they created networks of life far more complex than anything that had existed before. These were not incidental contributions. They were the structural beams upon which the entire edifice of terrestrial life was raised. The forests that eventually rose, the vertebrates that diversified, and the intricate webs of life that now span every continent all owe part of their existence to the groundwork laid by those early arachnids. They were the hidden engineers of Earth's transformation, shaping landscapes not through strength, but through interaction, pressure, and persistence, the forgotten architects of the living world. In the deep past, long before continents looked anything like they do today, before forests shaded the land, or vertebrates took their first uncertain steps, a single lineage of life began weaving a network that would eventually connect every corner of the planet. That lineage was the arthropods, creatures built on a design so versatile and resilient that it would go on to shape nearly every ecosystem Earth would ever know. Arachnids are only one branch of this immense tree, but their story cannot be told without the others, because together they transformed the planet in ways that ripple through every living thing, even now. It began more than 500 million years ago in the Cambrian seas. At a time when most animals were soft-bodied and slow, arthropods emerged with a set of evolutionary innovations that would change everything. Their bodies were divided into segments, each one capable of evolving new functions. Their limbs were jointed, allowing them to crawl, swim, dig, and grasp with unprecedented precision. And their exoskeletons, made of tough chitin, gave them both protection and structural strength, letting them grow larger, move faster, and explore new environments. These adaptations set off a cascade of evolutionary possibilities, allowing arthropods to spread into roles no other organisms could yet fill. Trilobites were among the earliest and most successful of these pioneers. They roamed the Cambrian seabed in staggering numbers, shaping marine ecosystems as both predators and prey. Their success created niches for other organisms to exploit, fueling an explosion of biodiversity. Over hundreds of millions of years, trilobites evolved into countless forms: burrowers, swimmers, filter feeders, and scavengers, each one subtly influencing the structure of the marine food web. Even after their extinction at the end of the Permian period, their ecological legacy endured in the adaptations of the arthropods that followed. As the lineage diversified, it branched into forms that would eventually conquer every environment on Earth. Crustaceans remained in the water but adapted to fill roles from deep ocean scavengers to reef building engineers. Insects, small and incredibly adaptable, made the leap to land and air, becoming the architects of terrestrial ecosystems. Arachnids carved out a different path. They became the first great land-based predators, their emergence reshaping food webs and driving the evolution of prey species. Together, these groups created the biological scaffolding upon which terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems alike would be built. The connections they forged went far beyond predator and prey. Arthropods are central to the web of ecological relationships that sustain life. Consider pollination, one of the most important biological interactions on the planet. As flowering plants evolved, they formed intricate partnerships with insects, shaping each other's evolution in a process known as coevolution. Plants developed vivid petals, sweet nectar, and specialized structures to attract pollinators, while insects evolved long proboscises, specialized behaviors, and refined senses to find and exploit floral rewards. This mutual dependence now underpins most terrestrial ecosystems and provides the foundation for global food chains, including those that sustain humans. The same coevolutionary dance can be seen in the arms race between arthropod predators and their prey. The emergence of swift, visually acute vertebrate hunters, for example, was partly driven by the challenge of catching agile insect prey. Birds evolved rapid reflexes and precision flight to capture them in midair. Bats developed echolocation to hunt in the dark. Even the shape and color of many plants were influenced by the insects that pollinate them, while the defensive spines, poisons, and camouflage of countless animals are adaptations to arthropod predation pressure. These feedback loops ripple outward, shaping entire evolutionary trajectories far beyond the arthropods themselves. Arthropods also play vital roles in the hidden layers of ecosystems where their influence is less visible but no less profound. Detritivorous species like certain beetles, mites, and crustaceans break down dead organic matter, recycling nutrients into the soil and fueling plant growth. Soil-dwelling arthropods mix and aerate the ground, allowing roots to penetrate deeper and water to flow more freely. Predatory species regulate populations of herbivores and disease-carrying insects, maintaining the balance that keeps ecosystems stable. Even coral reefs, often celebrated for their vertebrate inhabitants, depend on the tireless labor of tiny crustaceans and arthropod larvae that form the foundation of the food chain. Arachnids themselves have evolved countless ecological relationships within this larger network. Many spider species have co-adapted with specific prey types, refining their silk and hunting strategies over millions of years. Some scorpions have evolved highly specialized venoms, tailored to the physiology of the creatures they most often encounter. Certain mites live symbiotically with plants, defending them against herbivorous insects, while others form intricate associations with birds and mammals, hitching rides or feeding on parasites. Each of these relationships represents a thread in the intricate web that connects all life, woven slowly over vast spans of time. Humans, too, are part of this story. The food we eat, the oxygen we breathe, and the landscapes we inhabit are all shaped by processes that arthropods set in motion long before our species existed. The crops that sustain billions depend on insect pollination. The soils that nourish them are built and maintained by arthropod activity. Even our technologies reflect their influence, from materials inspired by spider silk to robotic designs modeled on insect movement. Our existence is deeply entwined with theirs, even if we rarely notice it. The web that connects life on Earth is not a metaphor, but a living reality, built from countless interactions over hundreds of millions of years. Arthropods sit at its center, linking organisms, shaping environments, and driving evolution in every direction. Their story is not confined to their own success, but extends outward into the lives of plants, vertebrates, and even humans. They are the architects of complexity, the silent engineers of biodiversity, and the threads that hold the tapestry of life together. And woven within that tapestry are the arachnids, still stalking, spinning, and sensing tiny yet essential actors in a story far greater than themselves. For all that science has uncovered about arachnids, their ancient rise, their astonishing adaptability, their role in shaping life on land, vast portions of their story remain hidden. They have walked the earth for more than 400 million years, yet much of what they do, how they interact, and even why they behave the way they do is still shrouded in mystery. The deeper scientists look into their world, the more they realize that many of the most important questions about these creatures are not about their bodies, but about their lives, how they think, how they communicate, and how they have carved out such a remarkable place in the natural order. Some of the most intriguing puzzles lie in the realm of communication. Unlike mammals, which use sound, or birds, which rely on calls and visual displays, arachnids speak in ways that are nearly invisible to us. Many spiders, for instance, rely on vibrations to send signals across their webs or through the ground. A male approaching a female's web often plucks the silk in intricate patterns, a coded message meant to announce his intentions and reduce the chance of being mistaken for prey. But the nuances of these vibrational languages remain poorly understood. Do different rhythms convey different meanings? Can spiders adjust their messages depending on context, or do they rely on instinctive patterns etched into their biology? Chemical communication adds another layer of complexity. Scorpions and some spiders release pheromones into the air or onto the ground, creating invisible trails that guide potential mates or mark territories. Yet scientists still struggle to decode the chemical vocabulary they use. Even more elusive are the tiny gestures and tactile cues, a brush of a leg, a subtle shift in posture that may carry rich layers of meaning. Together, these communication systems hint at a sophisticated behavioral world that humans are only beginning to glimpse. Courtship, too, remains full of unanswered questions. In some species, mating is a delicate dance, choreographed with astonishing precision. A male jumping spider might perform elaborate visual displays, waving its legs and vibrating its body in a performance that rivals the rituals of birds of paradise. Other species rely on subtle chemical cues or silent displays that humans barely notice. But the most fascinating question is how these behaviors evolved and what they reveal about arachnid cognition. How do individuals make decisions during courtship? How do they evaluate potential mates? And why, in some species, does courtship end with sexual cannibalism, a phenomenon that still defies simple explanation? Social behavior is another frontier full of mysteries. Most arachnids are solitary, yet scattered throughout the group are surprising exceptions that challenge assumptions about their nature. A few spider species form cooperative colonies, weaving immense communal webs that can span meters and trap prey far too large for a single hunter. These colonies have divisions of labor, with different individuals performing different roles, from repairing the web to capturing prey. How such cooperation evolved in creatures typically known for solitary hunting is not fully understood. Similarly, some scorpion mothers guard their young for weeks or even months after birth, a level of parental care unusual among invertebrates. Whether such behaviors hint at more complex social structures in the distant past remains an open question. Reproductive strategies raise their own set of puzzles. Some arachnids use elaborate mate guarding tactics or deposit specialized mating plugs to prevent rivals from reproducing. Others present nuptial gifts, offerings of prey, or silk-wrapped packages whose function is still debated. Are they simply a distraction to avoid cannibalism, or do they play a deeper role in mate choice and reproductive success? The diversity of these strategies suggests a long evolutionary history shaped by intricate selective pressures, yet the details of that story remain largely untold. Future technologies hold promise for unlocking many of these secrets. High-speed cameras are now revealing the subtle movements and vibrations involved in spider courtship, capturing behaviors that happen too quickly for the human eye to follow. Sensitive laser vibrometers can detect the faintest tremors in a web, translating them into visual data that researchers can analyze. Advances in neurobiology are beginning to map how arachnid brains process sensory information, offering clues to how they interpret signals and make decisions. Even the chemical language of pheromones is being decoded through molecular analysis, opening new windows into how arachnids navigate their social and reproductive worlds. Beyond individual behavior, larger ecological mysteries remain. How do arachnids coordinate with other species within their ecosystems? What roles do they play in shaping the behavior and evolution of their prey? Do they influence plant communities indirectly by regulating herbivore populations? And if so, how deep does that influence go? These questions hint at layers of ecological interaction that extend far beyond the visible web or burrow. Modern fieldwork is also uncovering new surprises. In remote caves, scientists have observed spiders forming temporary hunting groups, suggesting that cooperation might be more common than previously believed. In dense tropical forests, researchers have recorded previously unknown courtship signals, including the use of ultraviolet patterns visible only to certain species. Such discoveries hint that much of arachnid behavior still lies hidden simply because we have not yet learned how to look for it. Even after centuries of study, arachnids continue to elude complete understanding. Their communication is subtle, their societies rare and complex, their reproductive strategies astonishingly varied. The tools of modern science are only now beginning to scratch the surface of these mysteries. With every new discovery, the portrait of arachnid life becomes richer and more intricate, but also more humbling, revealing just how much lies beyond our current knowledge. What remains unknown is not a void, but a landscape of possibilities, waiting quietly beneath leaves and stones, in webs that tremble with coded messages, and in behaviors that have been unfolding in silence for hundreds of millions of years. Beneath the surface of the world we know, beneath the roots of forests and the pavements of cities, beneath the soil that cradles every seed, there exists a living network that most of us never notice. It does not tower or roar. It does not blaze across the sky or stampede across plains. It moves quietly through the undergrowth, hides within the smallest cracks of stone, and spins delicate architectures that vanish in the morning dew. It is the enduring presence of the arachnids, a lineage that has persisted for hundreds of millions of years and still shapes the world in subtle, unseen ways. A spider weaving its web in the corner of a window is not performing a new task. It is reenacting a behavior that has been refined over eons, an instinct born in a time when the land was still young and vertebrates had yet to leave the water. The web is more than a trap for prey. It is a living structure that influences the flow of energy through ecosystems. Each insect that blunders into the silk is part of a cycle that redistributes nutrients, sustaining plants, birds, and countless other creatures. Without these small, persistent hunters, insect populations would explode unchecked, and the balance of entire ecosystems would shift. In the desert, where days scorch and nights freeze, a scorpion emerges from its burrow as the stars rise. Its slow, measured steps trace patterns that have remained unchanged since the Devonian period. Every movement, every twitch of its pincers is a product of relentless adaptation. It is not just a predator, it is part of the soil's living system, contributing to the breakdown of organic matter and shaping the communities of organisms that share its habitat. Even its venom, refined through millions of years of evolutionary experimentation, plays a role in regulating prey populations and influencing the behaviors of species that evolve to evade it. Far smaller creatures join this intricate choreography. Mites, too tiny to see without magnification, crawl through layers of decomposing leaves, digesting organic matter and recycling nutrients back into the soil. They are builders of fertility, creating the conditions that allow forests to thrive and crops to grow. Pseudoscorpions ride on the bodies of insects, spreading from habitat to habitat like microscopic colonists. Ticks navigate the bodies of vertebrates, forming links in parasitic chains that, while often unwelcome, are part of larger ecological relationships that ripple outward through entire food webs. These subtle roles are easy to overlook, yet they are essential to the living earth. Arachnids regulate the vast swarms of insects that pollinate plants and decompose waste. They are prey for birds, reptiles, and mammals, transferring energy upward through the food web. Their burrowing, scavenging, and hunting behaviors shape the structure of soils, the distribution of nutrients, and the interactions among species. Even the chemical signals they release, pheromones, venoms, and defensive compounds, ripple through ecosystems, influencing behaviors and evolutionary pressures in ways we are only beginning to understand. The story of their influence stretches beyond the present. For hundreds of millions of years, arachnids have been shaping the evolutionary paths of other species. The prey they pursued evolved faster reflexes, tougher exoskeletons, and more complex behaviors to survive. Plants, indirectly affected by their regulation of herbivores, developed new defenses and reproductive strategies. Vertebrates, from early amphibians to modern birds and mammals, have adapted to hunt or avoid arachnids, creating feedback loops that still shape ecosystems today. Every species that walks, flies, or crawls across land carries the imprint of these eight-legged forces woven into its evolutionary history. Modern science is only beginning to understand the full extent of this influence. Ecologists studying food webs have found that removing spiders from a forest can trigger cascades of change. Insect populations soar, plant growth patterns shift, and nutrient cycling slows. In agricultural systems, scorpions and predatory mites act as natural pest control agents, reducing the need for chemical pesticides. Even human technology draws inspiration from them, from silk, stronger than steel, to sensors modeled after the delicate vibration detecting hairs on spider legs. Their presence is not a relic of the past, but a living, dynamic force shaping the present and the future. Yet most of their world exists out of sight. It unfolds beneath leaf litter and inside soil, in crevices and caves, under stones and tree bark. It is a realm defined not by spectacle, but by constancy, by the quiet persistence of countless small lives performing the same tasks their ancestors did long before humanity emerged. The strength of arachnids has never been in dominance or grandeur, but in their capacity to endure, to adapt, and to continue shaping the world from below. If we could listen closely to the landscapes around us, we might hear their presence everywhere. It is in the nearly imperceptible rustle of a spider's footsteps across a web, in the faint stirring of soil as mites turn it over grain by grain, in the soft scrape of a scorpion's pincers beneath a stone. These are the rhythms that have sustained life on land for nearly 500 million years, a steady pulse beneath the louder noise of evolution's grand dramas. The world above may change, continents drift, climates shift, species rise and fall, but beneath it all, the work of arachnids continues, patient and unbroken. Their story is not one of vanished empires, but of invisible threads that still hold the fabric of life together. The landscape we walk upon, the food we eat, the balance of nature that sustains us all, each bears the subtle imprint of their presence. And though they move quietly and mostly unseen, the world as we know it would unravel without them.